Jill's going to be a couple minutes late, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Don't you? Okay, we'll get this first meeting done. Let me see here. What time she sent that? Just 1 minute.
We can all turn on our own microphones today, by the way. Freedom!
Well said.
Oh, why isn't this working?
Because it's set up down there. So
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to get started with our first meeting, and Member Lofold is on her way, but we'll do this first short one. This is a special school board meeting canvassing votes for the general election, Tuesday, November 12th, and we're getting started at 4:20. Member Lofold, could you do Member Oswald, could you do the roll call, please?
Member Derek Eder? Here. Good. Member Kirby? Here. Chair Lofler-Kemp?
Here.
Member Lofold is going to be late. I am here. Member Sandstead? Here. Member Trinka? Here. Superintendent Gramseth?
Here.
Assistant Superintendent Horton? Here. Deputy Clerk Erickson? Here. Secretary Dolitz? Secretary Nebo? Here. And excited she is. The student representatives are excused. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Member Oswald. So we have a resolution approving the canvassing returns of the votes of the school district general election of November 5th, 2015. And so I am going to move this resolution, and then I will need a second. I move resolution B11193690. Canvassing returns of votes of school district general election of November 5th, 2019. Be it resolved by the School Board of Independent School District 709 as followed. It is hereby found, determined, and declared that the general election of the voters of this district held on November 5th, 2015 was in all respects duly and legally called and held. And I'm just going to highlight you have the documents in front of you, but at large, Alana Oswald, 10,528 votes. John Schwetman, 8,667 votes. Candidate Alana Oswald received the highest number of votes and is elected to a 4-year term for one at-large school board seat beginning January 1st, 2020. District 2, David Kirby, 3,100. Harry Welty, 1,563. Candidate David Kirby, having received the highest number of votes, is elected to a 4-year term for the second district school board seat beginning January 1st, 2020. And then District 3, Paul Sanholm, 2,590. Lauren Martell, 2,214. Candidate Paul Sanholm, having received the highest number of votes, is elected to a 4-year term for the 3rd District School Board seat beginning January 1st, 2020. The school district clerk is hereby authorized to certify the results of the election to the county auditor of each county in which the school district is located in whole or in part. May I have a second? Seconded by Member Sandstead. Is there any discussion? Okay. All in favor of Resolution B11193690, please say aye. Aye. Okay, motion carries 6-0. Thank you and congratulations. And now we just need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Member Sandstead, seconded by Member Trinka. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Okay, motion carries. Our first special school board meeting is adjourned, and we will move on down to our HR meeting where we will be taking roll again. Do you need some help carrying this down? So we will get started now with our HR committee meeting. And per new procedures, we will do roll call of this meeting. Member Oswald, can you do that, please? Thank you.
I sure can. Member Eater. Here. Member Kirby.
Here.
Chair Laffer-Kemp.
Here.
Member Lofall, welcome. I'm here, surprise. Member Sandsted. Here. Member Trinka.
Here.
Superintendent Groundseth.
Here.
Assistant Superintendent Horton.
Here.
Deputy Clerk Erickson. Here. Jackie would be excused, I imagine. Oh, sorry, Secretary Dolans. And Secretary Tebow is here somewhere. And the student reps are excused. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. So again, this is the HR committee working session, Tuesday, November 12th. And Chair of the HR committee, Kirby? Yeah, we can wait for you.
Let's see here. Board, close, HR. Review. All right, we're ready. All right, first thing on the agenda is the on the action items. Mr. Swirsky, do you have anything to?
Yeah, the first piece are the staffing reports. This is, again, the standard staffing reports we see every month. I don't believe there's anything surprising to report here for you.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Chair Kirby, if that's all right. Mr. Swirsky, I noticed that I thought we just sort of changed the name of GATE or Gifted and Talented, but I still see that as a title on a position. And so I just kind of wondered if what kind of language we were using on those positions.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. And which heading is it under?
Certified permanent increase, the last one there.
Yes. This is, well, yeah, this is printed out of the computer, which is the name that's in the computer right now. That has to be changed in there.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Anything else, Member Oswald?
I just had a question since we're hiring Ms. Knapp as the interim principal. When do we post for next year for the Denfeld principalship?
It would be a regular posting for next year's.
So is it going to come out in April then, or is it more the summer?
No, it wouldn't be in the summer. We can. Yeah.
Excuse me. I would hope for March.
Anything else? Okay. All right, we'll move on to the next subject, which is the hourly substitute pay raise.
What I handed out to you is right now, and it has been going on for a number of years now, there's a new minimum wage that's set that's tied to cost of living. And the new minimum wage will be going from, well, in our case, the $9.86 up to $10. So what we did is identify all of these are hourly positions that are usually less than what would take to be into a bargaining unit, or they're substitute positions, so these are not contracted positions. Then we moved all of the rates that were at $10 up to $10.15. The next closest rate after that is $10.50, and we feel there's enough distance in there that we didn't have to adjust beyond that. We also identified on here whether it is a substitute position or an hourly position.
Member Trinka.
A quick question. I remember us talking about a 10-cent increase about a year ago. And I remember that playground workers were a part of that discussion. Are they on here? And I'm just not seeing it.
Well, again, they should be there.
They're on the back. Oh, it's 2 seconds.
They might be beyond the, let's see.
They're on the back.
Yeah, on the
Okay.
back.
So how does this, I remember the discussion a year ago or so. How does this impact the budget? Did we budget for this?
Yeah, well, it's about, last time it was about a $5,000 increase. There's probably about another maybe $1,500, $2,000 with the 10-15s going up. So
Okay.
I would anticipate the total expense to be roughly around $7,000.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Moving on then. Next is our superintendent search update.
I have scheduled the firms to come in on Thursday, beginning, I believe that time was at 4:30. Unfortunately, Ray and Associates has decided to withdraw their proposal. So we'll just have the two firms, MSBA and BWP.
And this is at 4:30 on Thursday.
Thursday the 14th, I believe.
And do we know how long they're going to be
We're
presenting?
planning 45 minutes per presentation. So I think they're planning on PowerPoints, which would probably be 20 to 30 minutes, and then, or 20 to 25 minutes, and then take questions after that.
Okay.
My computer. Yeah. I just want to, just share with my board members that I'm disappointed that we've lost that opportunity to meet the Ray and Associates, even though, maybe the way we ranked, might have given a false impression of what we really were hoping for. I was really hoping for 3 outstanding firms to have an ability to meet with them and ask our questions that we might not have asked or been able to tell from our research. And that just shows us how fleeting, some of our desires are. We can have some of the best intentions in the world as a board and then, be forced to deal with something that's less than what we would like for our district. So just, I don't want to, go on and on about this issue. It was a Ray and Associates decision. I don't want to even discuss with any of you why we would think they would do it. I want that to be your private thoughts, because I bet there's some of you that are thinking that, and I just think it's their decision, and we would need to show respect. They could very well listen to this YouTube. They might very well have listened to ours last week. They very well might have looked at the newspaper and decided that, it looked like they were kind of low. And that's too bad. That's too bad. Their decision, and it was our decision to be transparent. And so I really was hoping to have 3. I really thought there were lots of good things in the Ray Associates. They were also, I had some other agencies that rose to the top as well, but I knew that if I really just wanted, I thought it was very hard to rank the top 5 anyway, and my top 3 were probably just kind of, what impressed me then. I wanted to see them. I wanted to meet them. I wanted to ask questions of them. And I think then we would have, the fact that we now only have 2, I think will be good as long as we are working hard. We've got to work hard now to look at these 2 firms and listen and come with good questions and be willing to, even discuss it. I don't know, just have good, robust conversation, I guess. So my thoughts on Ray and Associates. Thanks for your hard work, Tim. We'll move forward like we always do and have, the opportunity to be with 2 firms.
Do you have anything to add?
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. So Thursday at 4:30. Next is the superintendent review, and I believe we have a session after this where that will be discussed. And moving on to our never-ending nepotism discussion. It's listed as future. Do you have anything to add at this point in time?
We've had a chance to look at some other examples of nepotism policies. Again, what we've discussed in the past, the board, their decision is like how firm do we want to set it? There's kind of a multitude of settings that we can go from very firm, absolutely no direct lines to some dotted lines. And we do have some of that in the district right now that this could impact depending on how firm we draw the lines. The consistency I see in all of them is making sure there is not a direct line of report to people who are related by basically blood or marriage.
Okay, my advice would be we have enough to deal with right now that this can wait until December when we can hopefully deal with it and put it to rest. Remember, Paul?
Well, you just shared what I was going to say, but I might go a step further, but maybe not. I don't know. I appreciate that it's on our agenda. You've listened to us, and we want a policy like that, so you've been good about continuing. But I also know that we have a lot on our plate, and it seems to get pushed to the back. And then what it looks like is that we are, unwilling to deal with it, which isn't the case. And so I would even go a step further and say, let's just take it off. Keep it in your rearview mirror, keep it on, I don't know, something. And then when we, as a board, decide we want to put that on our agenda and have almost even a separate time, like a committee of the whole, where we go over a few more policies. Maybe there's a couple of policies hanging out there that we actually need to grit into. So, I know the fear of just leaving it to go, like taking it off, but I also don't like having something on the agenda that we are forced to let our leadership say, they haven't got to yet. I understand why you haven't gotten to it. There's a lot of things we're doing. And so I want permission, I want to give you permission, but it's a board vote, to take it off the agenda so that it doesn't look like we're not serious about it, because we are. And you are, and you've brought things to us, and we just have not, dug into it. Because I think it's not a 10-minute conversation. It needs thought. And now we've got a new board member, and so maybe there's some energy and some ideas and some different ways to go about it as well. So my suggestion would be to take this off the agenda until the first of the year.
Okay. Member Sansit.
I would suggest that that there is a draft to work with for the board to discuss, but I also think that it would be wisely run through a policy committee that could look in depth at something like this and all of our other policies, and not take everybody's time to dig through. It's much easier as a group of 7 to evaluate something tangible than just a general concept. So I would suggest that there is a draft prepared by Mr. Swirsky or others in HR. I'm not going to insist on December. I just want you all to do it, even if I'm not still here anymore. It's not, I don't see it as an urgent thing, but I think the best process would be to have a proposal that is discussed and vetted with a smaller group, perhaps of a board member or two, and a true committee, and then brought before the board with a recommendation. That's my thought.
Member Trinka.
Thank you. I actually disagree with both folks. I think that we need to push this through. I think while we do have a lot on our plate, I can't remember the last time we had more than like a 20-minute HR committee meeting, aside from maybe last year when we talked about the hourly wage increase. And I think that nepotism policy is really important. And I would hate for it to be pushed on the back burner until it's necessary for us to cover that, because we're running into an issue about it. So I would agree that I would like to see a draft made, depending on the conversation that we have in the next committee meeting. Maybe that will bring up some discussions about how committee structures might change or working sessions might change. But I would like to see us move forward with kind of as we handle it with other policies, that we look at a draft and we're able to respond to it and do a first, second reading and then pass or not pass something. So I'd like to see us move forward.
Member Lefsicant?
Yeah, what, someone has to turn off their light, okay. It might be helpful, Mr. Swirsky, I know you've handed out different things since we started this discussion, informational items, and maybe it would be helpful just for all board members to have all of those in one email to dive into for their own understanding of what we've already been presented on this. That might be helpful. Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, Member Oswald.
I tend to agree with Member Trinka. This has been on the agenda for 6 or 7 months now, maybe even more. And if somebody had worked on it 1 or 2 hours a month, we might have something already. So I think we just need to decide to do it. I believe it is important. I believe the community will want this and to see that we take it seriously. If we just take it off the agenda and let it slip away, the community is not going to be happy. So I think we just need to get it done.
Anybody else? All right, I suggest that we read all of the material that we have, or if you're going to send it out again, so we have that. And as I recall, there was a model policy for one thing, and the point of disagreement wasn't that great. Let's see if we can get through it the next meeting, and if not, we won't, but at least we can discuss it and look at all of that. So I would put it on the agenda for the next meeting. Anything else, Member Lofeld?
So, Member Kirby and the rest of it, so just for a point of learning on my part too, when we have conversation and we're kind of close in what we want our leadership to do, but yet I'm not sure do we then make a motion at Tuesday's meeting to put nepotism, to get a draft nepotism put together, and then does it come to a vote? And I would say, I think it can go off till January, and I don't know, the vote fails or passes, or do we just, I don't know, how do we give that leadership the message? Because I'm not really agreeing with Sally and Alana. I'm kind of agreeing with Nora. I sort of, so I don't know how Tim knows what we want. So let's be clear. What do we want?
Well, I think that we had a model policy, and we have to have a first reading for changing that policy.
Yeah, it's basically been samples from some other school districts. There was a MSBA model policy, but it was for charter schools. It was not for public, but it was very usable. Parts of it are. I think we also looked at the St. Louis County. They did pass theirs, and the one that passed with St. Louis County also. So.
Member Trinka.
I think I would agree with Member Lofeld that I'm a little bit confused about the working sessions versus committee meetings. And I don't think we did a first reading. I know that you gave us a bunch of samples, which I really appreciated. So I would like to see us do a first reading. And as somebody who has worked for an organization where we didn't have a nepotism policy and we should have, I think that regardless of what the community thinks or doesn't think, I think that for employees it just makes things a lot cleaner to have a policy in writing. And I would imagine, as somebody who lives with recovering HR person. I know that someday you'll join the support group, Tim, but it always is helpful to go back and be able to refer to policy on things like that. So I don't know that it will be an extensive conversation. If it is, I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have. So I think that if we did a first reading in December and a second reading in January, recognizing that we've got a new board member coming on, but I don't want that to hold up the process. I think we could probably move forward with something relatively quickly, but I know the superintendent has something to add too.
Go first.
I think we're kind of back to Member Lofalt's question. Like, okay, there's not agreement around the table, and at committees you don't take votes at committees, or at least that has not been the practice in the past, and that might change in the future, but we don't really have the precedence of taking a vote to make a decision. So it also plays into what Member Sandstead was saying about, should there be a policy committee that's kind of working on these? It also gets into agenda setting, because you're talking about an agenda of a future committee. And I can just share that typically on meetings like this where there's not clear agreement, there's not clear direction, Tim and I connect and say, okay, what did you take from that? Here's what I took from that. And so I don't think that at this point we have clear direction and you can't take a vote on it here. So I would recommend that this be considered for the December agenda, because that would be the nearest conversation for that to happen. The agenda setting for December as it currently exists.
Member Sampson.
I think that gets right to your question, Member Lofald, whether or not this should go on the agenda. And most of us agreed, and you disagreed, with putting it on December's agenda. But how we go about choosing what goes on the agenda is what we get to discuss in the business committee. So, yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to throw the issue out to, if it's on the December or January, that's fine. I'm just saying that I think sometimes it's been on the agenda for HR, and I'm kind of into just valuing people's work and not putting something on the agenda that I know personally we're not going to address, and so then it just kind of looks like I don't want to use the word shame, that's way too dramatic, but I just don't want to set someone up to fail when we have things on the agenda that we know. But he's being honest in his work with us because he knows we've had the issue, or we've wanted to have that. I'll go back to, and I will encourage all of you to go back. I don't know what meeting it was, but we had meetings, and maybe I think I was even sitting in the same place. I would say maybe in April or May on nepotism, okay, 2. And I brought even I did some research, and I have a file right here on my computer that can't share because it's an open meeting, but of other schools' policies as well. And if I remember, if we go back and listen to our nepotism policy, I think what sabotaged that conversation, at least for me, was that I didn't know if we were talking about nepotism within the employee staff area, which I think, you can hammer that out in a short order. We were really going extensively into nepotism within contractual people that we hire. And that's where, as a board, we saw that it was a bigger issue than just saying that we're going to have someone report to a different supervisor or that we're going to have someone not work in the same building. That, I think we have agreement. It was when we got into contracts that we all kind of had to take a step back and ask Tim to go back and do more work, and that's where it stalled. So that's kind of where we're at with nepotism. So with that, too, again, and then as I researched nepotism, it is in actually 2 different areas within board policy. It's in an area of whatever, personnel, staff, it's a number, or HR or whatever, and then there's one in the Dave Spooner type of area, right? Dave's over there. I won't ask you, but I just noticed that I saw nepotism policies in different areas because it deals with different employees, and then it was different wording. So that's the other direction that we need to give. So that's my my thoughts about that. So if you want to give Tim Swirsky the idea, the okay to draft a nepotism policy for staff and hiring personnel within our district, maybe that's a nice place to start, knowing that I think we need a separate nepotism policy that goes into our contractual hires across the area. And what that looks like, I think, is a little bit more sophisticated.
All right, I think there is consensus that we'd like to move forward, though, and if you could get that information, make sure we all have that information, and perhaps just draft based on the policy that you have, and we can look at that, and then they can decide at agenda setting if we want to discuss this further. If not, we can put it on. But I think we need to start from somewhere, and that will give us a start. So if we could have that for the next meeting, I think, if there's consensus on that at least. I don't see any non-consensus, so I'll take that as positive. All right. And I think that is all that we have on the HR committee for today.
Okay, so we need to have a motion to adjourn the HR committee. Moved by Member Sandstead, seconded by Member Trinka. Is there any discussion?
Yeah. I have no place to write that down. It's not on a sheet. I just take attendance on the sheet. So how should I do that?
Why don't you just make a note?
Make a note.
We'll touch back with Linda on
Okay.
creating.
Okay, here's some sticky notes here. If you
Gotcha.
And can somebody tell me who voted?
Okay, yeah, it was moved by Member Sandstead, seconded by Member Trinka. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries to adjourn the HR committee. And also, I meant to say this at the beginning of the meeting, but with having a new member eater here, do you want to introduce yourself? I know she knows Tim, but she might not know you. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so now we will take roll call for the business committee working session. And Member Oswald, if you could do roll call, please, while staff are getting up to the table.
Sure. Member Eater. Here. Do you mind if I just use your last name?
Yeah,
Okay. I should have probably asked last time, sorry. Member Kirby. Here. Chair Lafleur-Kemp.
Here.
Member Lofald. Here. I'm here again. Member Sandstead. Member Trinka. Here. Superintendent Gronsa. Walked out of the room. Assistant Superintendent Horton. Here. Yay. Deputy Clerk Erickson. Secretary Dolans is excused. Secretary Tebow is somewhere. And the student reps are excused. We have a quorum still.
Okay, thank you so much. And staff, do you mind just introducing yourself just at the beginning of the meeting here? That'll be helpful. Okay. Thank you.
I'd just like to mention that our school board member elect is sitting over there too, so you can wave hi at him. I don't think anyone here means to, ignore you over there. But in fact, I would love if he would be able to come sit at the table. But that would be a call of anybody else.
Yeah.
Not my call.
Yeah. I think we'll continue on. Member Trinka?
Just as a point of clarification before we get going, since we're in a sanctioned meeting, if I want to move things around on the agenda, do we have to get approval? I know. So I would like to move a couple of our discussions up because I know we have a couple of members who have to leave. But I don't know if that's...
You don't vote?
So we're not voting, so I can move things around on the agenda. Okay, all right, great. We're just going to do it. Okay. So we will start with the financial report and education, and then I'd like to move the discussion about committees and agenda session settings to after the finances, so that for people who have to leave, because we already started that conversation, so it's I know that'll be a lengthy part of the discussion. We have a long night, so but I'll turn it over to Peggy and Kathy for the financial report.
So this is a report, pretty standard report for September. We're still in the process of closing out our fiscal year 19 books, so our auditors are still working on that. So once that is completed, then the additional reports of cash flow will be added to the standard reports for the month. But for right now, we're doing interim financial statements and budget changes reports. So I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has on that.
Member or Chair Lafler-Kemp?
Yeah, not a question on your interim reports, but just it might be helpful just to briefly highlight where we're at with the audit process and when it'll be reported to the board. That might be helpful for our new members.
Sure. So our fiscal year end is June 30th, and we have auditors come in and do some preliminary work in August, and then they come back the middle of October and do extensive field work. We're putting together final financial statements that they're reviewing, putting our notes together. They will review that. We have to have financial data submitted to the state by November 30th every year. And that requires auditor approval to do that. They have to be marked as audited data. And then in December, at the December Business Committee meeting, a representative from our audit firm will be here to discuss the audit and answer any questions that any board members have on that.
And as a follow-up, great question, Chair Lafler-Kemp. As a follow-up, how do projected versus current ADMs play into how we're looking at the current fiscal year that we're in?
Thanks for that question. This year, if you look at the monthly pupil unit report November, or if you're just looking through your packet, it'll be the first one that has the grid with a lower grid. We are actually ahead of projections based on the budget. We met as a business committee or as a budget committee internally in the last 2 weeks, and once we get the audit completed, we'll be coming back to consider revising our budget to have a little bit higher projections, which would mean more revenue. We've been hesitant just because enrollment is such a volatile number and we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but through November, and if you look at the report, one of the things that Cattery Little did for us is the top of the grid projects as if the students were here that are here today, and then she does a projection of if everyone stayed here, what would it look like? But what we know is that we have attrition that happens in subsequent months, and so that lower grid tells us based on last year's attrition estimates for the grade levels that we see, we're projecting almost where we are for last year's final. So while I won't necessarily promote going all the way to that highest number, we'll probably bump up that 8116, maybe 50 or 60 pupil units right now, and then continue to look at that and do further adjustments. So using the 8116 last spring when we talked about it was based on what we had seen in trends in the past, and
we're just seeing more students staying in the district. So that's great news right now. But again, we may continue to see some additional attrition. So we'll be looking at doing a review probably for January.
Thank you. I appreciate that because I know this can get a little confusing. So I have two questions then follow-up questions. One, do we see, do you have kind of a rough estimate, even if it's just off the cuff, of ADMs going down in January if people graduate in December? And then subsequently, can you just do like a quick pro-con on keeping the budget as it is, even though we might have higher enrollments, but as a way for us to kind of make up for some of the financial challenges we've had in the last few years?
Those are great questions. Thank you for both of those questions. One, we do see, and that's why we did put that expected attrition number in. That's kind of a culmination of what we'd see throughout the year. Specifically, we do see some, not necessarily early graduations, but we have excused releases, which lower our ADMs when they're not in the building. They prorate the ADMs. So what Cattery did was just take historical averages and use that as what we did as kind of a to do an estimate going down. So this projected to the end of the year would include already what we would consider for early graduations. The pros and cons of picking a number for the budget and sticking with it is very challenging, really challenging. As you know, when we came up with the number that we did for the adopted budget back in June, we had a lot of conversation. We thought about it a lot. We were at a different number. We raised it up at one point. We lowered it. We raised it up and we lowered it again. Because of our budget, and even if you think about every student generating for us on average between $8,000 and $10,000, 50 students might be $500,000. In a $110 million general fund budget, that breadth of change is not big from a percentage standpoint, but that $500,000 can do a lot of things. So, and because so much of our work is estimates, having that as a backup, a cushion, something there in case something else unexpected happens, we're aware of where we are, but we are also projecting and thinking about what would it mean if we added ADM to our budget. Once you put it in and make it real, then it's spent. And so we'll come to you probably next month with an idea and then come in January with probably a revised budget consideration for the board. And certainly if the board feels that they want to stay more on the conservative side, knowing that we kind of know where numbers are, that would be great. Or if we decide to amend the budget a little bit, just so you know, and we talked about this in our budget meeting, since July 1, we've had increases on the expense side of our budget. We've had to add staff. We added a kindergarten teacher. In our special ed area, we've had some really high need students come in, which when we don't expect them and they have needs, we have to provide those services that go along with them, and they may not have been in our budget. So while we try our best to have those areas, this money, should we decide to adjust the revenue side, has really most likely already been spent along the way. So I think what we want to try to do, and what I hope we do for you at these meetings and other meetings and our correspondence, is just to keep you up to date on where things are. And when we do have adjustments and changes that you feel comfortable that we know where the dollars are, even if they're not in the official budget, if you see that our pupil estimates are higher than where we've budgeted, that may mean we have some room in the budget. If we make that official action to adjust or amend the budget, we'll do all those things that go along with it. Does that help?
That was a better answer than I could have asked for. That's really, and I think it's really helpful for us to understand how that impacts your process and also our understanding of budgets, as we know it is. It's a living organism. So I appreciate that. Member Lofeld?
I just want to reiterate that too as well. And just between, I think, pronounce it Cattery? Cattery. And Peggy and you, we have a really nice team that I think we have been building relationships with you, and your communication with us is so effective and clear. Member Trinka's questions are always able to open up even more understanding and opportunity, so I appreciate that. I also agree that there are times when you struggle whether or not to add it or not. I guess I'm sharing this more with my board so that when we communicate with our community, we can share it in probably not as effectively as Kathy just did, but that, because I often will get a question like, well, where did that money come from? So then you are hiding it. Well, then there isn't transparency. And it's like, I want you to understand that, yeah, there can be some adjustments in the budget, and if we don't put it in, it's because we then know that if something happens, we do have this money, and so it just helped me to maybe try to frame a question. I'll have to listen to it because I don't think I'll be able to really do it as well, but thank you.
Thanks, Member Lofald.
Yeah.
I know it's just additional, like your YouTube celebrity status is just a whole nother ballgame.
It's bounced up to like 200 some watches.
Moving on up.
Kind of like the 40.
Great. So any other questions about the financial report? Again, great donations or fundraisers this last month. And then do you want to move into your educational piece about special education revenue part 2?
Thank you. I kept it to one page,
yes,
even though there was much more that I wanted to share and provide. For those that remember the exciting conversation we had last month, which was more just foundational information about state special education revenue, thinking about the components of that. And it is just a component of our large piece of revenue, but remembering that state special education revenue is a supplemental reimbursement of certain qualifying expenditures, where our general education basic allowance is based on pupil counts. So we have oftentimes say that the money follows the student. In the special education world, expenditures drive that reimbursement. So we kind of have to think of it in a different way. So when a new student comes into the district, depending on what their needs are, their expenses are going to be different per student, and so that reimbursement is going to be different per student, where when a new student comes into the district and they generate that basic allowance is the same for every student. So special education, a little more complicated, based on kind of a different funding source. But what I wanted to just share with you today and not spend an awful lot of time was to talk a little bit about how the state funding calculation happens and how it affects us. And I think this is a great reintroduction to the special education challenge we have as a district, and the message that we hope to bring back to the legislature again this year, and hopefully we'll find some resolution. And so what you're seeing on this page is at the bottom half you're going to see a chart, and this is the story of what revenue our district was eligible for, which is the blue area, what expenditures we had and what eligible revenue would have been available to us had there been no ceiling or floor created for us. So those blue areas, which are the ceiling and the floor, the black bar, the black line, is what we would have generated without the limitation, but then we were stuck at the top of the blue. Mm-hmm. So in that first year, which was actual fiscal year 17, what we could have generated had we not had that calculation because of tuition billing, which lowered our floor, we would have generated over $13 million in that first year, but instead we got $11.6 million. And then each year, the floor goes up and the ceiling goes up, and we lowered our expenditures. We got closer, but we were still stuck at that same ceiling. So we were only able to get $12.6 million instead of the $13 million. So we cut our expenditures to try to help get closer, but we still, basically, that gap in between is us using general fund dollars other dollars to help supplement special education because we weren't getting any reimbursement on any of those things past the blue ceiling. And the ceiling kept going up, but then our expenditures and our loss got higher. We saw a big jump because we had huge costs from tuition billing again. That was a big jump. The charter school tuition billing kind of ebbed and flowed, and in estimate for 2019, this would have been way more revenue for us to grab onto, but again, because we were stuck at the ceiling, we're stuck again. And again, as a thought, and then just to make it more confusing, our revenues are based on the prior year expenditures. So keeping that in mind, so we like to make school finance as fun as humanly possible. So the actual FY17 revenue was based on fiscal year 16 expenditures. The fiscal year 19 revenue that we just got was actually based on 18. So when we're trying to adjust, we can't fix our revenues for the current year because they were based on expenses we've already had. When we create expenditures now, we have to wait a year to get the dollars. So we've already created a budget, so our challenge lies in when our special education folks come to us and say, we have this need, and it's like, okay, so we have to put the expense in this year's budget and try to make our budget balance, but we're not going to actually see any reimbursement for a year from now, but we're using future revenues for that future budget, so we can never really catch up. So if we don't know where we're going and we have unexpected costs, it's hurting this year's budget to try to get a future reimbursement. So that's a huge challenge for the district. What I want to share is in that last blue bar, you can see that it's matching out because the legislature has changed the law starting in fiscal year 21, which is next year. There is no more ceiling. So they're saying we're going to give you as much reimbursable revenue as your eligible expenditures allow for. So this is new. What we don't know for sure, which I haven't heard one way or another, is that there's a statewide cap on how much statewide special education money they're going to share statewide. So they may say there's no ceiling, but if they run out, if there's $1.2 billion worth of money they're going to give to special education and there's $1.4 billion of eligible expenditures, they're going to prorate everybody. So they're going to say there's no ceiling, but they're not going to be able to give dollar for dollar. So they created the ceiling so they didn't have to prorate, but now we're going to have to wait to see if eligible expenditures will be under what they're able to spread. So that's the unknown. Was there questions?
Yeah, you answered my question, but Member Sandstead?
So we've got the estimates in the years ahead here. We are having to estimate the bills we're going to get from charter schools as well, right?
So, and to make it more fun, the tuition billing is current. So the tuition billing piece is current. The expenditure pieces are from the year before. So fiscal year 19, which ended June 30th, we're still waiting on bills. We don't find out the final billing for last year until February of next year. So we're waiting almost 9 months before we can find out what the actual bills are. Now, we have a fantastic special ed finance person here in the district, and she monitors and looks at a lot of things, and we're feeling pretty confident, but in the last month we've already seen more bills come in, so where we had projected where we thought we might be, and what we're seeing coming in, there's some more bills that are probably still in the hopper, which means for every bill that we have to pay, that's less revenue in our pocket.
And so do we get any help from the charter schools in projecting their tuition billing?
No. No, and that was part of the conversation that we had with legislators last year, and in fact, when we were testifying, I believe it was Senator Uyghur that was asking charter school leadership, how do you share that? And the answer was, well, we're not required to, so we don't. And so that is one of the conversations that we plan to bring to the legislature again this year, is having some say, or at least some required notification before that, because as Kathy mentioned, it's really hard to predict and plan a budget when you have we can use history as a guide, but if you look at how this line varies, history is not always the perfect guide for budgeting in this area. And pre the floor and ceiling model that we had, we were in the model where we couldn't predict how much we were going to get from the state, because that's based on, if the state says we're going to do, I don't know what a realistic number for that is, $200 million for special education in the state, and then all of the bills go in from all over the state, and they say, well, we have enough to get through 80%. So you're going to get 80% of what is owed you. And actually 80% we would be thrilled with. But there were times that it was 60%, 50%, like 47% of what you were eligible to receive, but based on the state budget, everyone only got so much of some percentage of that. And so that's what they tried to get away from, and we fixed some issues and created others. So it sounds like we're going to be back to that prorated piece, which is unpredictable as well.
Oh, thanks. Wasn't there an additional tuition billing? I can't think of the word I want. The charter schools are accountable for more than they were in the past. And that's,
Yep. So they did change the percentage. So the resident district in past years was responsible for 90% of the bill, and the serving district was responsible for 10%. They are now going down to 85, and then in subsequent years it's going to go down to 80. And that's supposed to make them think, because they're going to have to pay a higher share. And so the challenge for the serving district is, if you get to bill back almost all of the cost, why wouldn't you give as much service as you possibly could, because you're not responsible? What we're asking for is for reimbursement for those prior years. Changing the floor and the ceiling doesn't necessarily help us anymore now that the ceiling has gone away. Had that law not changed, we were fighting for a floor and ceiling adjustment. With the ceiling going away, we should be able to get reimbursed for all of our eligible expenditures pending proration, which we don't know the answer to that yet. But we still would like to get reimbursed for those other years where we think our floor was artificially low. And I think our number for these last 4 years would be approximately $4.3 million. Had our floor been where it should have been, we would have been able, over these last 4 years, to collect approximately $4.3 million more. So that means all those blue boxes would have been higher up on the grid, so we would have been able to get reimbursed for a higher amount of money. So we're thankful that they're considering some changes, but I think this helps. But the charter school billing portion, we still believe that there needs to be conversation about the limitations. All districts have to be thoughtful about how much they can afford to spend, because we're only billing back that unreimbursable portion to the districts that we're serving for those students. And when you're serving your own students, you're stuck at what you get. There isn't anybody else to bill. So they have no resident students, so they get to bill out. They're not stuck on the other side of the coin. So we just want there to be some thoughtfulness on a tuition billing limit, so that they can only bill so much, like kind of cap them off, even at 85% of an hourly rate that isn't any higher than a certain threshold. So I think there's a dialogue that wouldn't just help Duluth, it would help all districts. Mm-hmm. I mean, that would be a real positive thing. And because this is a policy year at the legislature, I think this is a great opportunity to have that dialogue. And I think we've laid a pretty good foundation, but I think it's more conversation that needs to be had.
I just want to put a perspective into with SPED, just from being in the classroom and being in our buildings a lot. It's a tough topic to talk about, to justify why we struggle so with finances in our district. It's it's really hard. Nobody, I mean, and I don't necessarily want to say it either, but in this context, when we have the graph in front of us and we know the needs of our students and our children, I think overall in the last 15 to 20, maybe even longer years, the students coming in that have special needs or that have, that qualify for our services is growing. It's growing because we are able medically to support and encourage. And so, bless all of us that work in the SPED programs and that work with children in our buildings, because we have really high needs. And so it frustrates me when I know that our federal and state dollars are not covering. And then we hear that we take a lot of it out of general fund. Then it also makes sense to me as a classroom teacher that I've seen such a struggle in our SPED programs. Not to blame our district, but we have made caseloads higher. We have struggled to get support materials and curriculum and staff because it is a huge budget issue, and we are tight. So then we kind of try to rearrange our level offerings in SPED from different levels. We can't offer it because the expense for staff and teachers, and it's just, but it's a hard conversation to have to our community who are looking to us to say things like, why can't we have more money, and it must be because of the red plan, or it must be because we mismanage, or we're not transparent. And that has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with the diagram that's on the front, and hopefully community members that will look at it or listen to us, and then not attack us if I were to say that our SPED costs are high. And they don't. My community does not. But I can't explain it as well either, and I'm very nervous to bring up that this is a drain on our budget, because I want our students to be in our schools. That's the best place for them. But then I also know that it compromises their education and our budget and our state. So I'll be active and hope that you'll ask me to come down to the legislature and speak and share our concern, as well as all of us to write and to stay involved in the process this coming year.
Member Lefferkin, I can't see your microphone, just as a heads up.
Sure.
Thank
There
you.
you
I
go.
appreciate that.
Well, I so thank you for the work that was done last year on educating legislators across the state on not only the Duluth concerns, but just special education funding and concerns in general. And I know our school board association, that was, again, part of their legislative agenda as well, and they did some good work as well. You brought up just a couple things that, being we're having this discussion, it just might be helpful for people to understand. When you talk about us being the resident district, what does that mean? And then secondly, just maybe a brief explanation, again, more for the public on tuition billing.
Thank you for those two great questions. So in our pupil world, we have identified students in multiple ways, and one of those is resident students. And that means if a student lives within a district line, so their residence is within a district line, that's their resident district. They may not be going to school there, but wherever they are considered a resident, that will be their resident district. So we have obviously many students who live in our district lines and attend many other school districts or other educational opportunities. So the resident district is responsible for paying the cost of those students. And I think the philosophy was when you open enroll, the money follows the student. And if we were to have open enrollment of special education students, and I'm not saying that anyone would do this, but we might go, you should go to Hermantown because they have an excellent special education program, so that they would take the burden of all those costs, and we'd have districts suggesting that kids go to other districts. And so this way the students can choose to go, and the responsibility then lies with that resident district. So wherever that student ends up going, it's the resident district, so there's no influence or reasoning why a student would end up someplace else. And so that's part of the philosophy behind that resident student calculation. And then in terms of tuition billing, So many years ago, school districts were responsible to actually create and send bills back and forth to other districts. We had to create an hourly rate created by the expenditures for each program area. The state took that process over, and they have created the hourly rates. They create many reports. They take in all the information and calculate how much you're generating based on the kids you're serving and what those rates are. And then they figure out how much you owe all the other districts. And our net revenue is based on the plus and minuses from all of the districts that we tuition bill. And if you were to look at our tuition billing report, we serve all kinds of students from all over the state of Minnesota here in Duluth. We serve many, many students from many districts, and we also have many of our students in many districts throughout the state. So some bills may just be a few $100s because a student may only be there for a few days, and then other bills may be thousands of dollars because they're in a district for the entire year someplace else receiving services. So we get those reports in total. Our finance department here can see those individual bills so they can see what those students are. That's not public information, but you can actually see the totals per district that we pay in, and then the districts that bill us and that we have to pay out. So that information is available. And as we shared in our legislative information, we used to be what I would call a tuition winner. We billed out more money than we had to pay, so we actually netted revenue. And then, interestingly, in the same year that the legislation changed, we became a tuition not winner by about $1.4 million, meaning we paid out that much more than we took in. And so that's where we lost, and that's where we continue to lose. Now this year, right now, I think the last time I looked, we're only at about a net loss of about $400,000, which is better than where we were in the past, but that could change. And again, it's just the ins and outs of all of our students. Did that help?
Great question, Member Lafayette. Thank you, Superintendent.
I just wanted to point out, just with our discussions about budgets and all of that, that the information that Kathy has shared is revenues. It's not our expenses for special education, which is a higher amount than our revenues.
Excellent point. And I did want to mention, I know a few people have said about the federal portion, which has been stagnant for many years. The state has been investing more in special education. In last month's little education piece, I shared a chart that showed how much the state of Minnesota has been putting in, and they're at the $2 billion mark for special education. Remembering that the state of Minnesota spends about $52 billion on education, E12. So of that portion, that's going into state special education. But then there's the cross subsidy, which is that gap that we're paying out of our funds, and that is over $800 million. So statewide, districts, in order to cover the cost of special education, is using over $800 million of revenue that would be considered general fund expenditures to help supplement the cost of special education. So of the $13 million we're receiving, we're spending about, in state, about $20 million. So the other $7 million must come from the regular revenue that those students are generating, as well as our other revenues to help cover those costs.
Thank you. Chair Lafayette.
Oh, I had another question. Is there a section in the Department of Education that you would recommend, again, just thinking of our two new board members here, to go to if they want to get a crash course on special education funding, or for all of us for a renewal, besides what you're giving us? Yeah.
Kathy's YouTube channel.
There is a special education handbook on the Department of Education's website. It's pretty good, but it's complicated. It's not necessarily for the average reader. There is two legislative packets on, if you go to the legislative website, Educating Finance in Minnesota, and then the Legislator's Guide to Education also has a special ed component in there, which I think is probably that highest level version, which I would highly recommend. And then, of course, I would recommend picking up the phone and giving me a call, and we could spend time together visiting about that, because I think there's the general story, and then there's the district story. And each district really does, especially when it comes to special education, has their own story. And so what another district might be going through isn't necessarily the same thing as what we're going through. So be happy to visit about special education anytime.
Assistant Superintendent Horton?
Yeah. Just a little bit of background too, and Kathy had mentioned the federal component of this. Just a little background information. In 1975, there was a promise at the federal level to pay for 40% of the excess costs of special education. That didn't happen. And in 1997, we reauthorized IDEA, which is our federal legislation around special education, and there was no funding component tied to that. So we saw increased, we talk about unfunded mandates. This is the example of more things to do, no funding that follows. In 2004, there was a reauthorization of IDEA, and they had set a path that by 2011, we would actually hit that 40%. If you look at the data, it was 16.6% in 2004. It stayed right around 16%. It jumped in 2010 up to 31.9. We had a stimulus that year, and then jumped back down to 15.5 the following year. So while there's a major state issue here, and we've talked about a lot of the things we're doing at the state level, there's a federal component to this as well. So just a little background to why states in our country are struggling with this.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I actually, when I was a state PTA president, lobbied on that for 3 of those different years when as part of the Minnesota PTA, and so the idea that legislation. I'd also mention that usually at the January school board training, there's a couple workshops that are offered on special education funding as well, and they've been good workshops too. Thank you again, Kathy.
And just a note on the federal portion for us, we receive approximately $2 million in federal. Much of that is predetermined that it isn't for extra services, it just goes for the cost of the existing services that we have. And because federal is often considered a flow-through, allocations from the federal government come to the state. Many of them stop at the state level and get spent at that level, and then the rest get trickled down to the district. So there isn't necessarily that direct path from the federal government right to the schools. So when they talk about the allocations to the state and what gets already sent to the districts, there's a catch. And so, thinking about what that means and what's getting funded, and then what actually gets to the student and gets to the program, there's just the hierarchy of needs there as well. So just thinking about that process. And there are several paths to federal funding. So there isn't just one federal funding. We have early childhood funding. We have our regular federal education funding. And then there's specialized federal funding. But as always, these are supplemental and not supplantable. So they can't go towards the things we're already spending our dollars on. So they have to go for things over and above what we're already providing. So that's the other piece of federal that makes things a little bit more complicated. So when we do reductions, we can't then supplant back on things we had cut. We have to do supplemental things with those as well. So like I said, school finance, super fun.
Supplemental, not supplantable. I like that. That's great, Kathy. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Let's move into the discussion about agenda setting policy discussion.
That doesn't have any attachments.
It doesn't have any attachments. So it's really just a discussion, I believe. And I'm not sure if it's...
No, but
7J.
4C will be the discussion on the consent agenda, which I believe.
Yeah.
Kathy? Yeah.
Yep.
Is this also the opportunity to talk about committee structure? Do you want
Yeah,
to
so
both?
I thought I thought they could both. I think what I said earlier is we could discuss both of them because I think one feeds into the other. Chair Loeffler-Kemp?
Nope.
Oh, nope. Okay. So I think there have been folks who have had some questions about about how we do agenda setting. And then we also have had a lot of legwork done by 3 of our board members with the immense gratitude of the rest of us on potential changes to the committee structure as well. And so that's, I think, where this conversation is, that's kind of the genesis of the conversation. And so because we're in a committee meeting, we're not making any decisions. But I think the floor is open. Well, I don't think. And the floor is now open for discussion about agenda setting. Member Oswald.
Thank you, Chair Trinka. I'm trying to be very thoughtful about this. It's not that I'm asking for drastic changes. What I have heard over the years has been that some bias exists in the agenda setting process. And whether it's intentional or not, that's not, I don't need to debate any of that. And what I strive to do, because this has been a topic during the election, it's been a topic for years, but finally it was a topic in the election. The public has overwhelmingly, to me, have said that they want more transparency. They want to believe what we say. They want us they want to believe that we are being honest, but we have to show them that we're being honest. So I brought this forward knowing that Member Sandstead really wanted to get something like this done, and Member Trinka is on board also. I imagine we all want some kind of tweak to this. I'm not saying that what we do is wrong, but I am saying we have the opportunity to show our public that what we do is okay just by doing it in a different space in public. Because we have to build trust with them. We want to have the best school system, and we want to have our community believing in us and backing us and being a part of what we do. So as much as I would love to have an open agenda setting session with all of us participating, if that's the direction we as a board can go, I would greatly support that. But I know that's not where everybody else is at. And so there is an ultimate compromise in this, and that we have them remain just as they are, except move it to an open space and prove to our community that this is how we do things, and it's open and accessible, and they can witness it all they like, because we do this together and we need them to back us up. So that's what I have to say, and I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks.
Member Lofeld? Oh, I thought you had your light on. Just made that up. So my thought around, I wanted to have the discussion, and I know Member Lofeld talks about this all the time about how enriching our discussions are at the committee meetings. And so my desire to have the discussion is also in part to support the way that we use our time as board members. So we spend a lot of time in committees talking about, how many pages is this agenda, or is this packet this month?
152.
152, which is on the short end generally for the business committee. And so what often happens is we have this really robust discussion that during committee meetings, and then we do a report out at the board meetings that just kind of gives like a snippet of what we discussed, in large part because I'm not going to do the education that Peggy and Kathy I should as committee chair, but I think that we have just ways to kind of tweak the way that we're doing things so that while we might do a report out, and I know this is part of the consent agenda piece too, that we're really using these committee meetings to filter into a higher level strategy conversation that we have at the board meetings, which is, in my experience, is the way that I would like, I think that's a sign of a high functioning board, not that we're not a high functioning board. So I think that, and I also would like to have more say in agenda setting, especially, as somebody who's been a committee chair for a couple of years. Not that, and that has nothing to do with, the leadership that we've been under for the last 2 years, so that's not where I'm coming from on this either. But I think that it would shift responsibility and some onus into different leaders on the board, so committee chairs, et cetera. I'm very cognizant and want to be very sensitive about not shifting a lot of work onto staff and cabinet members. So I think that's also, I really would like to hear from you all what your thoughts are about this, because I do want to be cautious and cognizant. As somebody who reports to a board, if it was like, my board does get say in our agendas, but if they had full say. So I'd be curious what your perspective is, and I think CFO Erickson, you have an additional level of perspective as being an elected official as well. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation as a board, because I think that it actually gives us the opportunity to not micromanage. I think it actually gives us an opportunity for administration to use us in different ways where it might actually take some responsibility off of your plate, which I think is what people are looking for us to do. And I didn't run in the recent election, so I don't have I didn't hear the same stories as a number of people sitting around this table did. But I think that it would challenge us for us to be used at the top of our licensure, for lack of a better way of saying that. Member Lofeld?
Oh, there's a lot. Yeah, you could, tell me to shut my mic off when you think I have dominated, because I do dominate, and I do talk a lot. But I just, have just a lot. I have thought a lot about this, and sometimes I think this comes to me and it's like, that sounds like a great idea. So I'll try to stay on two different. So I feel right now we have two conversations going on. You're wanting the deeper conversation about committee structure. So do I. You want to have a conversation about, what does an open meeting agenda setting look like? So, right? Do I think that you think they're two related?
I wasn't talking about committee structure. I was talking about agenda setting.
Oh, you were? Okay. So I'll talk about agenda setting. So I'm somewhat confused about what, as a board, what our definition is of an open agenda setting meeting. And Member Oswald, you somewhat highlighted it, and then you went another direction a little bit, like all of us should have input or be present, be invited to the table for agenda setting. And then is the public also allowed to come? So our agenda setting would take place in a space like this, and people could be there. Or are we more desiring to have an ability to come to the agenda setting meeting as a board member when it is just the board and the leadership? So and I know there's some dilemmas with how that, so I just want to know, first of all, before I launch into any other ideas, what kind of open agenda setting meeting is this board really wanting to hammer out? And yeah,
I'll just clarify my comments, if I may, Member Trinket. Thank you. I was talking about what my desire is. I would like to participate as a full board in agenda setting, but I also realize that's not where everybody's at, and so I'm saying there is this compromise that the current meeting that currently happens just move into an open space so that it can be observed. and nothing changes except the location. So, then it can be listed as an open meeting, but only certain members are assigned, and, we can watch it on YouTube if we want, or whatever it is. So, but my desire is to have more input to lessen the burden on all administration. The model that I look at is the city council. Their agenda setting sessions are less than an hour, and I wouldn't expect it to be anything different than that, and it goes rather smoothly, and everybody gets the same information, and they're off and running. But that's what we're here as a board to decide. I'm not the whole board, so.
I think that's a really important clarifying point, Member Lofeld, because I think, don't they also get a meal too? They get dinner, I think.
We have to work that into the budget.
They also have more staff than we do too, by the way.
I was just making a joke. Maybe it's because I'm hungry. Superintendent Grunstedt.
Just as part of all of that, just a reminder that anytime you have a majority of school board members, it is an open meeting. It has to be posted and it has to be open to the public. So there could never be a meeting of the majority or more that was private. So just to answer that question.
I think that's helpful. I think one of the other pieces is that we have we have such active committees now that everybody, like most of us, are here at all the committee meetings, and so I think that's a little bit different maybe too. Did you have your microphone on earlier, and I didn't see it, CFO Erickson?
My comment was going to be about the committees versus committees of the whole. So when you have a committee and it's just the members of that committee, other members should not be participating, so that's why we've changed the structure to everyone being able to be here. And so if we want those committees to be committees of the whole, then everybody has to attend and you have to have a quorum, versus the committee structure where you have just a portion of the board participating and doing basically the legwork, and then reporting it back to the board to provide information and recommendations to move forward. So either way, there's pros and cons to both, but if you move in the direction of the committees of the whole, then it's the quorum of 4 that you need to have versus the smaller committee work. And I know there's folks that have interest in serving on any or all committees, and then you have other board members who either don't have the resource of time or the resource of interest in all of the areas that the board would be participating in. I mean, again, I'm sure everyone would want to be on business committee because it's the best one, but others, so I think by making them committees of the whole, it's I don't want to say a forced participation, but then you're requesting that board members attend every committee meeting as well as a regular board meeting if that were to be the structure. So just as a thought.
That's really helpful. We do have a lot of fun here on the business committee. So in theory, then it should just be Member Oswald and myself who are on the business, who come to these meetings, and you and, okay.
There's 3.
There's 3. Thank you. I appreciate that. And the third one is Chair Lothrop. Yeah.
Nope, my light's not on.
No. I was saying that you're the third one on the committee.
Okay, yeah.
I was failing in my duties. I
was being nonchalant.
Yeah. Go ahead, Superintendent Grunstedt, and then Member Eater.
I did want to just point out that tonight is the first night that we've had that new structure, and that is why you've taken roll 3 times so far tonight, and you're going to take roll 1 more time, is because of that. So, if there were some changes that could lighten up the
Ayes and A's and nays, depending on. Yeah.
Right, or how many times you take roll in a night, or however you do that. That's part of that structure as well. It would also probably be helpful to know that the agendas are also set by committee with a different staff member in charge of developing the staff side of the agenda for each one. So Kathy develops the business agenda, all the finance pieces and everything that are in there every month, and I'd say that's probably at least 90 to 95% of that agenda is created just by the monthly business that you have to do with contracts and bids and financial statements that we provide the state. And then for HR, that is developed by Mr. Swirsky and his staff, and that's kind of, most of that is, just all the contract pieces and the hirings and changes, and that's kind of what drives that. And the education piece is very often reports that we are statutorily regulated on, or reports that we have to give the state, or it says you need to provide this report to the board once a year, and so that's where a lot of that agenda comes from. And in between are other agenda items that are requested from board members, but I would say the majority of the board's agenda is driven by just our monthly business that we take care of. So,
thank you. Member Eder.
I have a question just because I don't have all the historical perspective. So I need a little bit of how a bill becomes a law here, only how something gets on the agenda for a full board meeting. How does that work? So you spoke to how the different committee structures work, and a lot of the agenda on those committees are driven by things that have to be done, reports that have to be blah, So how does the agenda setting work in terms of a full board meeting once a month?
there is a school board bylaw that gets to that, and I'll look up the number while we're sitting here. What is it? Thank you.
203.5 for all the fans at home. Chair Lafferkent.
I think this is a good discussion. One of my concerns about having this discussion right now is because of this very piece, is that we have a new board member who, this is her first meeting. She is learning kind of processes. In January, we're going to have another new board member. Both these board members are going to be attending the School Board Association training in January that goes over a lot of, processes and just understanding kind of typical ways that boards work. And I know that we've put in a lot of work being part of the committee around looking at our committee structures and that, but I'd love to have this conversation. But I'd love to have it with our two new board members when they've gone through some training as well with the School Board Association, and any decisions that we would be voting on would be impacting their work as well. And I just remember when I was a new board member, decisions had been made the month or two before I started that I thought, gosh, I wish they would have waited till I got on the board, because there were a couple of us that came on the board at the same time that then we had to deal with those policy changes. And so while I appreciate this discussion and I'm glad we're having it, I do have concerns as someone who values the training that the School Board Association provides to new board members. And I'd like to continue with this discussion, but then really dive into it more when our two board members have been trained and have more context. We are going to be, earlier, I wish we kind of would have read the policy on consent agenda, which is something that we're going to do a first reading on, and I think it's one good change that we are making immediately. That also has been discussed, well, not immediately, but at some point, depending on how our discussion goes on the first reading. So I guess that's just, I don't know, as I've been thinking about this, my concerns about this discussion and spending too much time on it right now when we have where we're at with our board. So.
Go ahead, Member Sandsted.
All I'm going to say is there's no time like the present. But to answer your question, Member Eater. I served as clerk last year, and so I had the experience of doing some agenda setting. And in my experience, what happens is the Tuesday before the committees, in the week before the committees, a group gets together with the superintendent and other directors, and it's the chair and the clerk. And they go through the agendas, the draft agendas that have been prepared by leadership. And then whether it's the superintendent or Melinda or a member will say, oh, I got an email from Member Kirby, and he wants to include XYZ. And then that item is discussed and either put on or set aside for another month, or perhaps if it shouldn't go on for whatever reason is decided in this closed group, then that would be communicated to the member in most cases. There's also transmittal of other information beyond the agenda that then only gets to those two board members at that point. And so that's sort of how the agendas get created more procedurally. I fully support wrapping up the agenda session in a full board meeting, whatever you want to call it, where all members are present and it's an open meeting. I think that setting the agenda is a fundamental part of being a board member. It's our board. We should decide what we're talking about. I think that looking at, and this is, this isn't going to happen overnight, and it's part of a really comprehensive discussion that I know Member Oswald and Member Lofald, you've done a lot of research on the meta committee and restructuring things, and I look forward to seeing what the board looks like a year from now structurally. And I hope it becomes more efficient, and that you are able to continue to have interesting discussions with everyone that are not bogged down by a lot of repetitive stuff. So those are my comments.
I think that waiting for new board members is why the Supreme Court looks the way that it does now, because Mitch McConnell didn't want to hold hearings about Justice Gardner because they were waiting for a new administration. And I think it's also a little insulting because while Member Eder has not been on the school board before, one of the reasons she was voted in is because of her extensive professional experience. And so that is what it is. I totally agree that it's definitely, that this conversation is worthwhile having with Kelly and Paul around the table as well. But I think that pushing things off until January probably is not, I just think it's worthwhile for us to have the conversation while we have the folks around the table who are here. Member Oswald?
Well, I don't want to feel like a lame duck. I'm not going to sit here for 2 months not trying to do anything. We are all fully empowered members of an elected board, and we are here to do business, and this is business to do, to be responsive to our constituents' concerns. And this is totally within our power. It's not like we're asking to move the moon or, to some other planet or anything like that. Our community has said, some of them have said, they don't trust us, and here we can say, we don't have anything to hide, here we go. This is how we do it, and you're welcome to see it. Sometimes in agenda setting, like this past agenda setting session, we're asked as the two board members, what do you want to see? I'll share that CFO Erickson asked us if we wanted a presentation from somebody or not, and debated the pros and cons of that, and we decided not. So that was two members of the board giving advice for a decision that we all should have input on, because no two board members are legally required or legally able to make a decision for the whole board without a vote. So those are the kinds of things that concern me. And so I find it odd that we can embrace a consent agenda change before two more members come and or, are on the board, and yet we can't make a change on how we do business. There would be a learning curve on learning our existing way, and then have to debate whether it's good enough to change it or not. They would need a lot of time, and then they need to learn. When we can establish it and there's only one process to learn. That makes sense to me, but one of those members is here right now and has a voice and can use the way she feels necessary. She's part of this conversation, so I'm intrigued to know what you think. So that's what I have to say.
Member Kirby and then Member Lofa.
Thanks. Well, I'm certainly not against having a discussion about this. I have a couple of questions. Since we do things like every other school district in the state, and none of them seem to be having this issue that things are being hidden from, and I agree, I don't think things are being hidden. I didn't find that as being in an election this year and being out on the doorsteps, I didn't find that at all one of the questions that was asked of me at all. At least in my constituency, that was not an issue. But if it is, just because bias is claimed, it does not mean that it exists. So maybe there is that perception and we have to deal with that. And maybe an open agenda session is that. But why is Duluth different than every other district in the state? They all do it the way we do it. And some have fewer people in the agenda settings than we do. But they're not having this issue. So I don't know why, but I throw that out. I do think that given all of the committee work revision that has been done, it should be tied into that because there could be unanticipated consequences, and we should try and find those out as much as we could. I mean, I don't know what they will for staff and other things that people have mentioned. So I'm not against this at all, but I think just think through it a little bit more.
Member Lofa.
So I agree with a lot of what Dr. Kirby had to say, and I appreciate Member Loeffler Kemp's, just caution about when we will do this. She's really talking about the two board members, and that's an appreciation. Because really, we're talking about 1 month. We're talking about the month of December. I don't think I'm ready to do any action on this. I do want the conversation, desperately need the conversation. We actually should have started this conversation a few months back, but we just sometimes in the agenda have other things. And I've sat on the agenda committee 3 different times, and 2 out of the 3, none of us had sent anything. None of us had sent a request for something on the agenda. Now, that was one of the months, I think, was last April because Josh couldn't make it. The other one was July when Josh couldn't make it. And just recently, too. And it was just the most recent one where I had sent something, Member Oswald had said something, and actually she had said a few, and I said one of the same things, and and we had conversation about it. Was it a good month for it? I know that we looked at the agenda and said, "Ooh, I don't know if we have enough time on that." And it was my request. And when I send a request to my board, sometimes I'm just kind of sharing my vision of what I would think our board wants to. It's not like it has to be on the agenda next month, or I'm going to be totally thinking that you're ditzing me and that you're making a statement about what I want to see. I don't see that at all. And I actually had to clear that up with Member Chair Loeffler Kemp that I sent you some things, and she got back to me and said it's just not going to be possible. And she sounded apologetic, and I said it's okay. It's okay. I'll probably send it again, but you kind of now know. I think I actually sent a laundry list to you when you were clerk as well, with just some things because I don't know. I'm still practicing how to be the best school board member I can be, and if it's expected of me to send agenda items to the board chair, well, I don't want to be the only one not. But then I don't want to make more work for anyone either if I don't know what the real vision is. I think it's kind of interesting how we do this. So there's a couple more comments I want to say too, and I know that time is. So if I'm concerned about an open meeting agenda setting held for the public with all of us in attendance sometimes, and maybe sometimes we don't come. Well, is that an official meeting with 3-day posting? Is it a quorum? Is it, and I think it is. I think if we were to check it all out, that kind of concerns me Because, and then if Member Loeffler-Kemp puts out an idea for an agenda setting item and I disagree, I don't think it needs to be there, I don't think that's our priority, then are we going to spend 45 minutes to an hour? Member Oswald says it usually in the city council only takes an hour. But I don't know. I mean, sometimes we might come up with ideas and then we don't, so if you suggest something for agenda, does it just automatically get on? And so how does this board want to function if that is how we want to have an open meeting? I'm kind of like David Kirby. It's kind of like if we think we want that, I'm not opposed to that. I look at me. I know how to share my ideas. I'm not easily intimidated. I give thought to what I want to say. But it is one more level of work for all of us to prepare and to get here. And then what if everyone around the table is here, but we don't have a quorum? And then we have to let all of you go home because we don't have a quorum that day, because I have a debate tournament, or I'm overwhelmed and I can't get out of work. I don't know. I mean, there's lots of reasons why an actual public meeting, it might be more than we can chew. And that's why I want to have a further conversation. Let's talk more about that. Let's research if that is true. And then let's search our heart to see if, when we come to agenda setting, that we're bringing forth the real things. So that's one concern I have about the general open meeting. The second thing I think would be fascinating, though, because I really do feel this way, is that I think as a board, we should have a retreat. That's been on the agenda before. And I know sometimes we're concerned with everybody's busy schedule, but I say put it on. And if you can make it, we'd love to see you. If you can't, and I don't even think we need, we probably do need a superintendent, but I would also like to entertain that. Why can't it just be us and the public? It has to be public. I get that. But I don't think, we need to have the staff here necessarily. If we're setting vision and goals, then that's where our requests for agenda items should come from. Mm-hmm. That's what, and so if we wanted to really show our community that we as a board, because again, you've already heard how this staff comes to the agenda setting already with their mandated agenda. And I appreciated that. And on a side note, I will tell you that when I went to the agenda meeting for the first time, I realized that there was some, I thought, hiccups. Because if I'm sending an agenda item to the agenda committee on the day that they're meeting, the agenda already looks pretty full because they have set up their agenda. So by adding something like this conversation only gives them a headache saying we're going to be here till 8 o'clock. And so it tends to not get on the agenda. So I thought to myself, okay, I'm the education department or education chair. I should actually be visiting with him the week before, which I started to do. And we sat down and he told me what his idea was for the next month's agenda. And then that gave me a chance to kind of give some, if I'm the education chair, why wouldn't I share, he should share what he's going to put on there. And then if I have something I would like to also address, because I do have a background in education, maybe we could talk about that. But he already had it done. But that dawned on me that was just a little bit of a hiccup in that misstep. But I really believe that if we want more input in the agenda setting and we want a validation that we're being listened to, then as a board, we need to have a vision and goal setting, maybe every 3 months, maybe every 4 months, maybe once every 6 months, I don't know. And then we kind of will look at, and then you actually want to say to yourself, and I hear you, Member Sandstead, and I really appreciate all of your service, but what do you want to have accomplished by your end of your 4 years? When we go and set vision and goals, we have just given a big chunk of our time to this community, to this education. What do we as a member, as an elected member, what does Jill Lofald want to see not significant, but just where can I make a contribution? Instead of just coming here and being here and making votes that are controversial or not, and then see if that isn't in a vision or a goal. And then our agenda items that we're asking for come from those. and they can decide, and maybe that's when the chair and the clerk can actually decide where that's going to fit in our year, where we have conversation like that. I don't know.
Thanks, Member Lofald. I think Member Oswald, you're up next, and then Chair Lafleur-Kemp.
Thank you. This is a conversation, and so you're discounting this month. We have 2 months left, and we don't have to stop this conversation and start it again. It can keep going. Both people are here. Hi, Paul. Member Eater's right here. They're parts of this conversation. They're listening. So there's no reason that this can't be developed over time rather than starting and stopping and then starting up again at some point in the future.
I want this to continue.
Good. And then to Member Kirby, this was a hot topic at the D&T forum. And it's been a hot topic for the editorial board. And it's been a hot topic in comments on social medias. So I've been aware of those conversations, and I'm trying to be responsive to my public because I want to be responsive to my public. The Duluth population isn't the same as the rest of the state. Just because everybody if everybody jumped off a bridge, would we too? That's not a smart argument for doing it anyway. We can be trendsetters instead. We developed a T form and we took it to the rest of the state and said, look what we did. And we promoted it and got great press from it. Why not this? And it may not be something somebody else wants to do. Maybe it is. I'm okay with that. I don't really care what the rest of the people do because I know what our community is asking us for. Not getting a quorum, the city council never has a problem with that. In fact, I remember 2 years ago when they were bashing Jay Fosley because he wouldn't come to the agenda settings, and all other 6 people are there and all up in arms that he wasn't coming. Yet here we're like, ooh, don't come, stay away. That doesn't make a lot of sense either. So if the city council doesn't have a problem, I don't see us having a problem. Yeah, we're going to miss one on occasion, and that's okay, but you only need 4, and there's 7 of us. And if you're interested and you want your voice heard, why not? And I think, Member Lofald, you also spoke to why this does make sense. When you've been there 2 of the 3 times, there was no agenda item requests from board members. That shouldn't change. I think we request things as much as we really want to or need to or find appropriate, and sometimes there are months when nothing comes through, and that's okay. And I don't see why that would be different whether the meeting takes place in the conference room or takes place in here. So I think this would just be a really positive experience for our community to see that we can respond to their concerns and say, hey, we're doing the best we can, and come join us. And I would really like to be in those meetings with you and Mr. Horton here, because I'm the other member of the committee along with Member Lafleur-Kemp. Why is it just the chair if there's only 3 people on the committee that get to meet and talk about an agenda? I don't know. So if we're all at an agenda setting session, that conversation doesn't even really need to happen because I'd already feel that my voice is being included. But if I'm not clerk, and I know the chair of the committee that I'm on is meeting with administration, I would want to be there to make sure my voice was being heard. It's all about fair access and sharing all the same information.
Oh my gosh, there's so much here. I'm trying to figure out how I want to respond. First, I want to clarify my comments about our new board members going through the training in January were more. I like good process. I like board members well trained, and I, as you know, I, like many board members here, have attended many school board trainings, and those first 2 trainings that are required to go to that happen to fall with our conference, it not only gives them some perspective, and I'm not taking for granted the perspective both of them bring to the board, but it also gives them an opportunity to talk to other board members from around the state and talk about processes and learn what works and what doesn't. And we are not so unique as we want to make ourselves seem in terms of wanting good process. And I certainly have learned, even in my little town of Hellock, that their school board functions in some very similar ways we do in this big district, from talking and kind of learning. And those are the things, I guess, I just want to clarify. My hope for Paul and for Kelly is to have that opportunity so that when we make these big decisions, whether it's on committee structure or agenda setting or whatever board policy, that they just they're the ones who are going to be impacted by this in the next 4 years, and I want them to be a part of it. So I just want to clarify that because I think some people took it differently. And then the other thing, I'm glad you brought up the retreat, Member Lofold. I serve on the board of the Great Lakes Aquarium, and we actually just had a retreat a couple weeks ago and had some really great trainers that the city council has actually used. We have board members who are on that board, also on the city council. So I am hoping to bring, before I kind of wrap up my time on the board, that we do some kind of retreat and potentially bring those trainers. They were very good for a board like ours. So I throw that out. I'm glad you touched on that. And I guess the last thing I wanted to add, I have served as clerk of the board a couple times. I've now served my first year as chair. David Kirby is the only other person sitting around the table here who's had served as chair. And I will tell you that under 4 different chairs of this board over the 6 years I've been on the board, that we really strive to, after our agenda sessions, make contact with board members, whether it's about your agenda setting request or whether it's about topics that were held. I pick up the phone a lot. Some people don't like that, but that's how I try to have conversations with people, both as board chair as well as when the couple years I was clerk, whoever the board chair was then that I served with, we would kind of divvy up, trying to have those one-on-one conversations with board members about whatever topic that we felt you might want more information on, or to give you a heads up sometimes on this is what staff want to happen at the meeting. So, I feel like it's easy if you haven't been in this chair sometimes to say things aren't happening and or to kind of understand what we tried to do in terms of getting information out. So there's that piece. And then the last thing I just would say is I certainly am still learning that when I come to those agenda setting meetings, I don't know what our staff are doing, and I might have a great idea that I think should be on the agenda, or someone has brought an idea to me, and then I say, well, what about this? And then I find out, a group of staff are already having a committee on that topic, or the staff are already working on it in different ways, and I don't know that. The superintendent might know that, and that's what happens then at that committee meeting is he can provide, in this case, perspective sometimes on the bigger picture of what our staff are doing around the district. And so, that's, I think, one of those consequences we need to think about a lot when we're thinking about the agenda is just we don't, as board members, know everything that our staff are doing, the committees, the community committees they're a part of. And that's some of what happens at agenda setting, is just learning what our staff are doing. So I'll just stop right there because I could go on a lot about this topic. Yeah.
Thank you. And Member Lafleur-Kemp, again, I want to thank you for all the time that you spent with me, taking me to different schools, and then making sure that I am learning the process of the school board. So I really do appreciate that. The second thing, from Member Kirby, I'm just looking for a little bit of clarification. So if the Duluth School Board decided to change the way that they do their agenda setting, that would be different from every other district. So every district in the state of Minnesota does this the way that they do their agenda setting, which is the clerk and the superintendent and the. So there is a lot of heterogeneity out there in the way that agenda setting happening. Is that true?
The MSBA,
or we generalize it. Sorry, go ahead.
The MSBA policy is just the superintendent and the chair. Duluth added the clerk.
Okay.
So it is.
And that's pretty standard around the state, so it's pretty homogeneous the way that that's done. So this would be an aberration to change it? So we're already an aberration, okay, all right. Yay, that's where I function best. And then, okay, so just that piece of clarification I need to, when we think about agenda setting. And then would it be, and again, these are just questions because I'm new to this process, if it was just a piece to think about, if we did sort of have these agenda setting meetings more open, like when Member Loeffler-Kemp was sort of speaking about how staff may already be having his committees or things may already be moving when a school board member's bringing something to an agenda. There might already be work being done within the district. So would having an open session like that then be a better way to disseminate information to the school board about what's happening in the district, so we're not trying to bring items that are probably already being worked on? That's just sort of listening to something that I've been thinking about. And then this sort of is a little bit varying a little bit, but speaking to what Member Lofald's talked about, I think that everything that you spoke about in terms of thinking about well, what agenda items do we need to set, because we don't really seem to have a strategic plan or a vision into what direction we want to go. So maybe that's something to start thinking about in the coming time, is thinking about in what direction do we want to move the district, and that really comes from strategic planning, and looking through strategic planning, we could also start to think about what does our committee structure look like and how does our school board function, and have that as a piece. So those are just some thoughts that have kind of been going through as I listen to this conversation.
I will just defer to what Member Eder said about most of Member Loeffler-Kemp's comments, and that everything she said, I think it can be made better by having an open conversation about it in an open space where it would lighten the workload of whoever's chair, and we would be able to hear of all of these ideas and other members or other administration working on all these ideas that we don't know about, because those are the conversations we're missing on by not being included.
Member Loeffler-Kemp and then Member Sansett.
Yeah, one of the things that often happens, from my understanding of talking to other board members around the state at all the different trainings I've been at, is that oftentimes when you do have a new superintendent, there is a new strategic plan that often comes with that, or they might want to move forward as well. And so, we do have that potential for that as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. But that's something that I've learned from other board members. So.
I'm glad Member Lofald brought up the strategic plan and visioning discussion point, and that's been something that has been floating around for several years, and I think probably would have come to fruition long ago had we had open agenda setting where it came out and was discussed, and I think there's more accountability if everybody gets to participate, and just that working memory of all members instead of just a few. And it would have, I think, we get into all of these timing issues with looking at the superintendent search and the boundaries, and visioning should have preceded all of this. Mm-hmm. And it's too bad that it didn't. And I would encourage you to not let it be pushed off just because of all those other important things that are going on, because I think that there's always an opportunity to say this needs to wait for new board members, new superintendent, all those things. And I think that that is the wrong instinct. I think that moving forward and making positive change is critical for this board.
Member Loeffel? I'm going to defer to you if you, did you turn your mic on just to talk to me, or?
No, I was just going to say, just to echo, actually this strategic plan, while we certainly need input from administration, well, we have to have input from administration, especially because there's legal ramifications and financial ramifications, but there are things that we're responsible to MDE for, as an example, that we might not know as board members, so it's important to have administration, but the strategy should be set by the board. And I know I look for our organization to my board to set our strategic plan. Now, I like to have a lot of input, but that's just my personality. But so I think that we should, I'm really glad that you brought that up too, because I think that we absolutely, if we could do it tomorrow, I think it would be, that wouldn't be too soon. So go ahead, Member Loeffel.
Just two comments. I want to thank Member Loeffler-Kemp for talking a little bit more about the retreat and the trainers that you had. And I think that's important too. I don't mind a retreat that is led by somebody else. But my comment was, when I said retreat, was really for us. Just us as, I mean, I don't know if you'd call it committee of the whole or a retreat, but like I said, I don't even necessarily, I'm not an expert on who needs to be at the table. I just want a time for our board to have conversation, even if it was just on this item right here. Although I know we need what they are thinking too, but so I don't mind trainers at some retreat, but what I was kind of trying to refer to is just a digging in work session for us to talk about. Oh, and Member Oswald, thank you for staying probably longer than you should, but thanks for your input, and we're moving. We researched 28 schools in our subcommittee, and all of them followed the same. And we were strategic in the 28 schools. We looked mainly at schools that were our size, with districts our size. So I would like to, and I did reach out to two board members, one from Mankato and the other from St. Cloud, because sometimes what our policies say, so every one of those 28 schools had the same policy we have as far as setting agenda. The agenda is set by the superintendent, the board chair, and the board chair. And then we have the clerk. But I don't know if that's always like exact. You know, like they have the policy, but maybe there is something else. So, but in Mankato and St. Cloud, it is that way. And it doesn't seem to be an issue. I think it is interesting, again, about agenda setting and how we can, again, I want to say before Nora, I just think we need better communication as a board. I do. And I don't know how to work around the old open meeting thing, because I know we can't all meet. But I really like reaching out to Member Oswald and having coffee. I'm sorry if she thought that my meeting with Jeff Horton was not an invitation. I am someone who wants to meet and have conversation. I want to know what you're thinking. And it's not because I'm going to try to convince you how to vote. I want to know how you're thinking before we come. I wanted to talk to every one of you before this conversation. But I also knew it was just a good conversation. And I'm a talker, and I want to meet. And I get frustrated when I try to reach out and then I think, well, if somebody thinks that I'm meeting just with Rosie, then we are like in cahoots. We're not. I want to find out. I want to share my ideas. I want to hear her ideas. I want to hear what Dave Kirby says. He doesn't say much, but when he says something, it's always really well thought out. As for me, I'm going to listen to this tonight at home and think, oh, Jill. But I just want to remind you that, again, I challenge my board much more than I'm challenging my leadership. I think they're doing all that they're doing really right, really well. And I think they get confused sometimes when we go off on tangents, and then we get frustrated thinking that they're not listening to us, when in actuality we have to talk with each other. I actually want to know what you're sending each month. I would love, if it was not an open meeting violation, to get a quick email from our chair that says, here are the members that requested agenda items this month, and here's what they asked. Because I don't necessarily think that any one of you have any more like power to determine what's on my agenda than I do. And so, so the open meeting thing kind of intrigues me. But again, I get all bundled up with quorums and publications and, arguing back and forth with each other about what should or shouldn't. But we can put items on the agenda. If we were smarter and worked together as a board, then 3 of us can request an agenda item and get it on there. I've only used it once. I think it's coming to fruition a little bit. But, we can do that. We can do that. If I want structure change in our committees. I do. I want 2 school board meetings a month. And I think that's why I don't think we're ready to change our open meeting next month. And it has nothing to do with the 2 board members. It has everything to do with, it's all tied in to consent agenda. It's all tied into committee, because I am visioning, but again, I'm only one person. You guys need to, tell me what you're thinking, but I think that there's some really great things we could do that would work with them as well. And those guys want to go. There's a whole meeting again. And we can also add to the agenda at any meeting. We can add to the agenda. It needs a second and it needs a majority, but that's a strategy if we're really struggling. So, and I think Bill has tried to get us to work with him on setting agendas. When I first came on the board, we were meeting with him every month, 2 of us, sometimes 3 of us, and he started that earlier in his career as a way to talk with us and to share with us and get our concerns. And we don't do that. We don't make the meetings. We get to the day, and I have a sub assignment. I need the money for Christmas, and I say, I'm sorry, I can't make it. So I think that there's some work we can do as a board before we make any big changes. But I do think that this is what we wanted. So thank you for putting it on the agenda.
I need to get on your Christmas list. I think it was. Well, did you want to comment before? Are there other lights on?
Yep, my lights.
I know yours is on, Chair Lasserkamp. But did you want to?
I kind of forgot. I did. I wanted to. When we talked about this before, we did say that we would come back with any related policies. And I think there are 3 that I know of that are tied together. One is on the agenda. It's 203.2, which is order of the regular school board, which is actually kind of that's the school board agenda that, you see it every single month. That really doesn't change unless there's a special resolution at the bottom. And then there's 203.5, which is the school board agenda. And then there's 213, which is school board committees. To me, there's a difference between talking about what we think of as order of the regular school board, which is what shows up on your agenda and you vote on every month, but really it never changes. And then there's the agenda of the committees, which is more what I'm hearing about. And 203 or 213 sets what those committees are, but number G in 213 says the school board reserves the right to limit, create, or abolish any standing or ad hoc committee as it deems appropriate, but it also defines committee. And with the new I can't remember statement advisory that came out, we really need to look at 213 and what we say as a committee and how we work as a committee doesn't fit the new advisory piece that comes out. So I think all 3 of these are really tied together. Consent agenda, which is on the agenda this month, is a little bit separate because it's more on that order of the regular school board piece, and we'll get to that conversation. And Kathy, as she's fabulous, and has a really good, some really good points to make on that. But I didn't want to lose the fact that these three really work together, and to do one without the other, I think, is going to be tough to navigate.
Can you say that first policy number again?
There's 203.2, which is on the agenda tonight. There's 203.5, which is the school board agenda setting. And then there's 213, which is school board committees. And all of these are bylaws. And so they have to be voted on twice. And it has to be, is it a supermajority or is it a supermajority?
5, yeah.
So 5.
So that's how we're going to describe you from now on. It's just, she's fabulous.
You'd be
Member Chair Luffa kept in.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying the bylaw changes and the process that it's going to take 2 votes. So thank you for clarifying that, Superintendent. The last time we kind of talked about this, I also brought up, and I think for discussion purposes, I brought up the Melinda, who services us as a board, and kind of her input into this process as well as kind of timing of when we made changes for the work that she does. And so I want to make sure as we continue this discussion that her input is heard because she is doing a lot of the work to make our life easier as a board as well as produces the schedule for the year and things like that. So, I guess I just wanted to make sure that got in there. And then the last thing I was just going to say, some of the questions you asked Member Ida and that the paper covered just the other day in an article, I called the School Board Association, as I often do, with the people I've built relationships with there and said, so tell me we've researched a bunch of school districts, but can you tell us about the process that other school boards use? And what I shared with the paper was just that it is more common than not that the process that we're using is what is happening. And so, again, I guess I just kind of stress that the School Board Association can be a good resource in terms of best practices as well as model policies for us to veer from if we want. But they put a lot into those practices. So I will stop because the man of few words wants to say something.
I wanted to bring this to a close kind of by, I was trying to look at the big picture here. And it seemed that Member Oswald was most concerned about transparency and inclusion, that somehow those are not being served well enough in the way we have our agenda setting now, which may or may not be. I would add that I think we need the agenda setting to be timely. That is, we need issues that are timely to be brought up right away. And I guess I don't see that as being a problem. In my role as chair, I didn't see that issues were being swept under the table that needed to be discussed. But we should also be efficient. We can't be here hours and hours and hours. And to do that, you need committees. And to have committees, you need to trust those committees. Otherwise, why have them? If everybody's going to be at every meeting, why have committees? So you need to have committees that you trust what they do. And I think that's probably a problem here because everybody wants to be at every meeting. So it's not that issues aren't being discussed, I don't think. It's that some members, people, community feel that there's information given to some that isn't given to others. I guess I don't see that as a big problem, but if they do, okay, how can we rectify that? And so that's maybe what we should look at more is, well, I think all the information comes out in the long run. I mean, I don't think there's anything that's hidden or biased or anything, but if people think that there's information given in agenda-setting meetings that should be dispersed more widely at the beginning, well, then maybe that's the issue that we need to really look at when we change it. Because I think that, and the use of committees. Committees make things more efficient, and you got to trust them. So that's.
Thank you.
When I
So maybe it's not that we have such an awesome committee. Maybe it's because they don't trust us, Kathy. That's why everyone's here. And David. Go ahead. Did you want to add something?
I just wanted to echo, I'm in a unique position where I serve you, but I'm also an elected official. And so serving as a city councilor, we truly rely on committees. We have probably 4 times more committees at our city level than we do here at the district. And so I wish I could say I knew anything about utilities, but I don't, and I don't serve on that committee, but I'm sure thankful that there's 3 members of the city council that I'm on that attend those meetings and come back to me and explain exactly why we have to have rate increases or why we have to do a bond because we have to buy new pieces of equipment. But luckily, I get to serve on the wonderful committee that's budget and finance. And to be honest, the first 2 years I was on the city council, I was not appointed to finance. And so that was just a process that you go through as an elected official. So, you know, I think the sentiments are very good here, but I think good policy is what we're striving for. I think MSBA provides a great framework for base policies, but then you take the time to have the conversation to say, what are those other tweaks that make sense for us by, for example, adding the clerk to coming to agenda setting. So I find the processes that we go through well, but I do think that just echoing the committee structure could be a critical piece of this so that the work that needs to get done then filters back through you as board members and comes back to that board level. So I appreciate your comments. That was where I was going to go before you spoke.
I think that's really well said. And I know one of my hiccups is, you know, when I do the business committee report, I'm looking at across this line of my colleagues, and they were all at the meeting. And so while I do need to communicate it to the community as well, it's, you know, that's part of why we don't have discussions at the board meeting, because you guys are all here. And it's either because we have so much fun. I shouldn't make jokes about this. You absolutely should trust this committee. So I think that's really well said. And I think maybe gets at some of the underlying issues of why we're having this conversation as well. And that would maybe make my concerns a little, not concerns, but that would change my perspective a little bit. Member Lofeld?
Yeah, we've had a rough couple of months with, you know, communicating with each other as boards. And when we have a board chair that leaves, there's a startling, you know, kind of revelation that we have to kind of self-check ourselves. I don't have any problems trusting my committee people. For me personally, and this is to tell Kelly and Paul this as well, I just did it because that's what everybody was doing when I came to watch. This has been a tradition in the Duluth School District where this, oh, maybe it hasn't. But I know that when I was running and I was attending committee meetings, everybody was there. So I just assumed that was my role. And I, being the, you know, good Lutheran and teacher and do-gooder and someone who wanted to show up and make sure people knew that I was interested and intense about my role, I'm going to be here. Come hell or high water, leaving my grandson with, you know, somebody that I maybe shouldn't have today, but I will. You know, so I can be here. But I think that we need to talk about that. We need to give ourselves permission to put 3 people on the education, 3 people on a policy, or 3 people on finance, and they bring the information. And we can stay home. We can actually, you know, stay with my grandchild a little, you know, but I come because I'm afraid if I don't, you're going to judge me. And so let's stop that. It has nothing to do with trust at all. It has everything to do with just clarifying our roles and being clear about it and giving permission to be on the committee you're supposed to. And we need more committees, probably.
I shouldn't have made that joke. It was, sometimes my attempt at levity falls flat. Remember? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
I just wanted to explain why I said no. It used to be that the committees were 3 people, and they would meet, go over the information, and then the reason it's on the regular board agenda for those committees to report out was because not everyone was there to say, and they didn't take any actions. It was, here's our recommendation for the whole board, and here's why, and here's what we talked about. And so that's why that description that always happens is because not everyone was there. Somewhere along and actually, those three people, if there was others that were present, other board members that wanted to hear the discussion, they would be sitting on the sides, not participating, but just listening to the committee. And then somewhere along the line, before I came along as superintendent, I remember when it was just committees, but somewhere along the line, it turned into all of the board members participating in that discussion. And so that's some of the history and that's why right now our bylaw 213 doesn't really match what we're currently doing. And so that's why we need to address all three of those.
Okay. Member Leffler-Kemp, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, I just, while we're having this discussion, whatever committee size we decide to go with, sometimes my experience of 6 years on the board has been, it's been hard to get people from the board to commit to being one of those three members on that committee. So we need to make a commitment with whatever we decide to do then that we're going to do the work of the board, so I guess I just, there is work as a board that we need to do to keep the board happening, and filling the committees is one of them, and there's many other things, and we also need to be committed to doing the work of the board, so.
All right. So next on the agenda is a discussion about the committee structure, and then we'll go back to the regular agenda with policies and regulations. I'm not sure who was going to talk about the committee structure. There's no...
Well, I think, can I...
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean,
this was really the direction given to the subcommittee that met, was really looking at committees. So, Rosie Loeffler, member Loeffler-Kemp, Chair Loeffler-Kemp, we did a little presentation. Mm-hmm. It was short. I wanted it more. I've wanted to talk about this in depth, but it's late. And I think that we're on a good roll, and we know we're going to have to, be looking at different committees structure anyway. But again, we researched 28 schools. Do you want us to re-talk about that a little bit more, or?
No, I'm sorry. I thought that it was on the agenda, so my apologies.
It is, isn't it?
I think
it is.
Yeah.
I think it's H or something.
It is.
Yeah. Yes, it's 7H.
Business committee put this on our working agenda, one as a comment from agenda setting that there wanted to be some discussion about it. And then particularly for our area, it was in relation to policy. And so that our hope was that there might be some consideration of a policy committee, because we have so many policies that need review that many of them right now run through multiple committees. And so oftentimes the folks that need to be at the table might not be at the table because they're not all attending the same committees. So our hope was just to have the conversation of those policies that could need to be reviewed, could maybe be done in a larger context and have them run through, and then would run through maybe our future consent agenda, and then to have those discussions at that level. So that was just from our perspective, but certainly I know there was a committee of the board that had been working on it, so we just left it as kind of an open discussion. We didn't want to bring forward any first readings at this point, but if there was something that you wanted us to bring together for a future meeting, that we would be happy to do that. So that's how it got on this agenda.
Thank you for that clarification. I think a policy committee would be genius. I can't tell if that was a sigh of relief or, okay. And I would wholeheartedly agree that, especially given what our colleagues in Stillwater uncovered and what we're learning from with some of our meetings and committee structures that there needs to be reconciliation that happens from a legal standpoint, but I think also from a workload standpoint. So, Member Kirby?
Thanks. I was chair when this subcommittee was appointed, and I think there were two reasons. One was Member Oswald and other people wanted a policy committee. But secondly, it was based on the article that I sent out that perhaps revising the committee structure would lessen the amount of micromanagement which tends to follow from the stuff we do. So it was trying to get away from that, get more towards policy and board work.
Yep.
So I think that that's a good thing. I would like to see the results of all of that, but not this month, not next month, maybe after the first year. Not to put it off, but if the subcommittee could get I should not want to use the word detail, comprehensive report, succinct, so that we would know what our options were, with some recommendations. That would be best, with recommendations from it, in my opinion.
Go to superintendent, because he looks like he knows.
If I could be bold enough to make a recommendation, that the board have a separate meeting and just have this as a topic when there's not another hour of business to get through. I think that then you could really dig in on this. You could have some people doing research on different things and share it all in there, and just have a work session or a committee of the whole. We historically have not had work sessions. We've had committee of the wholes. It's just a semantics piece. But have a work session just around this.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay. And if I could just chime in too, that I think if we work towards restructuring committees and meeting, that we actually might have more of us, involved in committees actively, because we would be freer to set with 3 people a time that works for all of them, and maybe that that might just increase our thoughts that we have to get in there and be on a committee. Because as I looked at all of these different schools, some of the 3-member committees, whether it was policy or legislative or there wasn't education committees much at all, Mr. Horton. There was reports from the assistant superintendent and the director of curriculum that gave some updates, but there was no formal education committee, I don't think, in any of them. But what I did notice is that there was, just a lot of different committees, and 2 or 3, and sometimes you served on more than one. And there was just multiple times. Some met at 7:30 in the morning, some met over lunch, some met, and that usually was once a month. Sometimes it was twice a month if it was like a policy. But I agree with the policy, even as we're going forward to hire a new superintendent. I look at other districts and their policies are really clear and clean and easy and logical, and not to, but, I understand that we have put policy because we have other things. Other things that take our priorities. And so, is there any desire for them to work on a policy committee policy change so you could start it right away, or not? Should we just wait for a work session?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I think we should take the superintendent's recommendation and run. Okay. So that's great. Speaking of policies, I'm going to keep us moving here. The policy 511 on fundraising. This is our first reading of this, replacing policy 1050. The question that I had was around, oops, that's not the right one. Let's see. Sorry. The fundraising activities must be approved by the school board before they begin. We have a lot of times where things come to us, and that's why it's in the policy, is that we're having a lot of things that we're approving after they've gone out the door. So I answered my own question. Thank you, CFO Erickson. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
We started out the conversation about crowdfunding because that was kind of a new thing that was happening, but what we found was that it made sense to look at our fundraising policy first, which The fundraising policy was under student activities. What we have done here was amended it to be for all district staff. So many times our teachers and others are doing fundraisers, not just our student activities. That's why we're just adjusting this policy just slightly to say that it would be both anyone who's running a fundraiser, not just a student-based program. And then we would add a regulation behind this one to just specifically address crowdfunding. There's some really good, and I shared those with you at the last meeting, they're just procedures to say how do we get started with crowdfunding and making sure you're picking the right online source. There's some that are better than others and that type of thing. So, but before we got to the regulation, we wanted to update. This is the MSBA policy with some edits to relate to both all staff and not just students.
Okay, so then following up on that, I would think that you would want that reflected under the responsibility under 3B. All fundraising activities must be approved in advance by the administration. Or do you want it to specifically say including school board? Because I read administration and think cabinet.
So it does start at the building level. That's where the student activities are based by the building principal has to approve those before they can even get started. And then they turn those reports in, and that's where they come into the school board. So the fundraising report that you see is not that they've been finished. This is the projected amount that they hope to raise.
Okay. And then if I'm understanding correctly, based on what you just said about the crowdsourcing pieces, that because I think part of this came out of, the discussion came out of a crowdsourcing fundraiser that was happening at Denfeld. So if it's a parent-driven or a family-driven, that's not subject to this policy, correct?
Right.
Okay, it's just if it comes from student or staff.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, Member Lofeld?
If it comes from the booster club of that activity, it's not
Does not have to fall under
this.
us.
Okay.
Correct.
Then my suggestion too, as someone who does this stuff all the time, that I think it has to. I think the activities directors have got to have a coaching meeting every year in the fall of all hired directors, coaches, and that's not happening. And so messages don't get out. And we hired the theater director in November. So who's going to update them on? We hire all kinds of activity people who fundraise all the time. That's, we don't want to deter them, but I feel like this is, this isn't a new policy. We've had this policy. And part of it was so that if I'm going to sell coffee for the debate team, that the choir can't sell coffee because that's my fundraiser. And so I understand why at the building level it needs to be controlled. I'm not so comfortable with it having to be approved before the fundraiser starts. Sometimes we're hiring the coach 3 weeks before the season starts or the show is going to be starting in auditions. And so I just don't want to put a policy out there that is being violated. And so I want the policy, but okay.
I think the point of having it before is to make sure that what they are doing is appropriate and doesn't break any of our other policies, and that it's being handled in an approved manner. That people aren't signing contracts because the only people who are able to sign contracts are Kathy or I, and so we need to make sure people are following the law and following school district policy.
Member Lafleur-Kemp, I think you were next.
Yeah, I from my experience of doing lots of fundraisers with different parent groups over the last 25 years, I think we do need to streamline it better. And I know, like when I was the state PTA president, this was probably one big issue I had to deal with a lot with schools about how are you communicating, or parent leaders, how are you communicating with your school that you're working with about whatever fundraiser it is. And so I guess I want to I support this.
Member Kirby?
Oh, thanks. I'm not sure whether this is part of it, but what about the funds themselves and how they're handled? And who follows the money? And how is it accounted for? And what happens to things like concessions? And where does that money go? And so I don't know if that's part of this. And I know that booster clubs, the Minnesota High School League has a specific regulation about booster clubs, and it may be a little bit different even.
Right. So that's part of the reason we're going to have a regulation that follows this policy so that we can talk about that. The student activity account process has changed to better identify the money that's coming in and out of where they're student-based, but we also have program-based or teacher-based fundraisers that are happening now too. So some, depending on how they fundraise, it could be that a teacher could post on their Facebook page, their personal Facebook page, send me $10 and I'll buy books for kids. And so technically, that's going to that teacher. There isn't an account set up. And so online resources like Donors Choose, for example, that money comes directly to the school district. So you set that up and it specifies that it's going there. So part of what we need to do, this is kind of step one, and then we have to drill down and make sure that everyone understands how the money flows and how we are accounting for those. And that is a critical piece of that. So we want to make sure that, one, the people that are donating know that it's going to the thing that they thought they were donating to. And then secondly, that we want to encourage for those that want to do it. We just want to make sure that the processes make sense so that we're using public purpose, that we're utilizing those dollars the way they were intended so that someone isn't raising money for something that isn't an eligible school district purchase.
I think that's smart too, and it also really protects employees too, because for tax purposes and a variety of other things, this puts parameters in place that safeguard them from. But so if, like, at the beginning of the year, when this is just a for instance, when we're donating money to the classroom, because some of us forget to go buy Kleenex or whatever before we go on the first day, so there would be, as we follow this process down the road, there would be those things that are set up so the teacher could just say, got it, great, thank you for that. Member Lofeld?
I just wondered too, again, so if there are fundraisers and they really, and they're really loose, they are created by either the teacher or the teacher or the coach, but maybe they didn't fill out the form and get the okay. Don't you think they're just going to skirt this policy and have a parent or now it's a parent group. Now it was my parents, or and they'll deposit the money in. I don't think. I mean, I like the policy, and I think it just really is about communicating it at the building levels about how this is going to roll out. But I just worry about it as far as the other ways that you can, like as PTA, if PTA raises money and is going to give it to MacArthur, and that doesn't have to follow this policy.
That's a donation.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So we have a whole other policy for donations.
Yep, we do. Yeah. Okay. I want the policy, but I also know that coaches and teachers, if they don't fill out the form and it doesn't get approved by the board in time, they're just going to have a parent sign. And then when you make the deposit sheet, and it says collected by, and then, if it is a fundraiser, if we bag groceries, and we go to deposit the money and we didn't get it approved, and the teacher signs the deposit form, is that a violation of this policy? But if a parent signs it, because a parent was sitting at the table as well, collecting money for that little classroom, I don't know. I mean,
Superintendent Grunstein?
It's hard to get a handle on it all, but we can only try.
My anxiety level is increasing.
So is mine.
There's rules and regulations around all aspects of this. So who is doing the work to raise the money? If a PTA is doing fundraising, it should not be students doing the selling. It should be the members of the PTA. So if you're having sale of whatever and all the students are selling it, that's not a booster club or a PTA fundraiser. That's a student-led fundraiser, and there's specific state language around what has to happen with those funds and who gets to say how those funds are spent. It's different if these are adult members of a booster club and they're hosting an event as a fundraiser and they're doing the work and they're doing all of that. That's something different. But I think we need a lot of clarity, and I think the discussion kind of lends itself to say we need to be clear about what is a fundraiser led by boosters or PTAs, what is a fundraiser led by students, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and really get that information out there. I think at the heart of this is this policy to give us the starting point.
So that brings up two questions, and I think the first one actually maybe came from Member Lofald, but do we need to define fundraising in this policy?
I think it does.
Does it? Okay.
Next line, something about
okay,
paying
all right.
groceries and
yeah, well, there are a number of examples, but I'm just wondering if that might clarify and help ease some anxiety. The second, I know this is a silly question, do beef jerky sticks fall under the nutritional guidelines? It's funny, but some of the schools get a ton of money from selling beef, and they do fit. Okay, all right. What else? That was funny. Okay, great. But that doesn't answer my question about defining fundraiser. So, because I think it is fundraiser versus, what was the other word that you used? Donation. Is there any need to further define?
I think what we're saying here is the purpose of raising funds. So if you're raising funds, that this policy, if you're a party or a component of an outside entity who is also raising funds and they're going to end up donating it to the school district, they're doing that outside of the purview of the district. So they're doing their work. We want to be careful that they're not representing the district, that they're representing their organization or whoever they're doing the fundraising on behalf of. So sometimes there's gray area where there may be people saying, I'm raising money for Duluth Public Schools, but they're not raising it they're doing it as a separate entity where some people use us. There's been other districts that I've worked for where the booster club has used the tax ID of the district. That's not allowed. So those are the kind of things you just want to be clear of. These are for our members, our students and student activities, and our employees who would like to fundraise on behalf of the district. And last month, or the last meeting, I was sitting next to our friends at the Duluth News Tribune and talking about the book fundraiser that we did, which started out as a conversation from a building administrator to her friends, to other people, to an article in the newspaper, and now they've generated thousands of dollars. And so her hope at the very beginning, if you were to talk to her, was, if I got a couple $1,000s, this would have been fantastic. And now, because we really didn't have a plan, and we didn't say, we're being very thoughtful about putting those monies aside, because all the people that donated have an expectation that it's going to go for the program that was talked about, even though that program has far exceeded. And so part of our regulation will include language so that should you meet or exceed your targeted revenue, here's the other purposes that those dollars could go for, which we didn't do in another case. So that people or folks, either you meet your goal or you don't meet your goal, but if you were to exceed, then you'd have another purpose for the library or for whatever those other purposes are. So I think the definition makes sense here, but if you'd like more clarity, we'd be happy to do that. But this is really for those in our district, employees or student groups that are trying to raise funds. This is the policy, and then we're going to have a complementary regulation specific to crowdfunding and the process.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. All right, let's see. Let's look at bylaw 203.2, the order of the regular school board meeting for the first reading on the consent agenda.
Passing out a sample consent agenda, there was a request to look at our last month's regular school board meeting on one side, and then the flip side of that is what would be potential components of the consent agenda. So the one side would just be what our October agenda looked like, and then the one that has A through M would have those things that are coming out of the committees or other components of the original agenda that would be under the consent. So just going back to the actual policy, this would be the complement or the explanation to what could be potentially on a consent agenda, and open for any questions.
So how would you envision the report of the standing committees potentially changing?
Thank you for that question. So how we structured the consent agenda is that the consent agenda follows the standing committee report. The committee report would actually just be a summary of what happened, and we wouldn't have to stop the committee. Right now, we stop the committee reports when there's an action item, and the chair takes over and asks for the vote and second. Those items would either move to the consent, and then as you're giving your report, you'll say, consent agenda item B4 is where you're going to find fundraisers and the donations and all those other things. If there's a resolution, a special resolution that needs its own discussion, that would move under special resolutions. And then when that happens, that the board chair when the regular meeting comes back, they would address it there. But our intent would be all those action items, you wouldn't have to stop your report. You would just go through the report and say, these are the things we talked about. Many of these items will be on the consent agenda. The consent agenda is always open for items to be pulled off for individual discussion. So if there was anything from the consent agenda that any member had a concern about, they would get pulled off for individual discussion by the board chair. So committee report would just, and the committee reports can be approved in the consent. So you would give your report, say what happened. You wouldn't have to ask for consideration for things being informational or taking action on any of the action items, because they'd all move into the consent. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. That does take away my ability to talk about beef jerky sales. But
you can talk about it. We just don't have to stop.
I can talk about it, but we don't have to stop. Got it. Thank you. Assistant Superintendent Horton.
You could talk about everything you talked about. We just don't have to ask for a vote.
I'm trying to get a laugh out of the beef jerky, and it keeps dying, and I should just let it go. Assistant Superintendent Horton.
I have Member Oswald had to leave, and this actually goes back to 511. I can't speak for a board member, but she'd leave some information. I'm just wondering how the board would like to get her comments on policy 511's first reading. Yeah, I was going back. I tried to catch her right at the end there, and so I kind of bled over. So not sure how you'd like to get that information.
I guess my preference would be that she can send them, or we can talk about it during the second reading.
Yeah.
Like
this
we would
is the
normally,
first reading.
like we would do standard.
Okay.
So we'll just ask her to share that at the next meeting or at the board meeting when we approve it.
Totally agree with you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Member Chair Lothrop-Kemp. Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Let's see. I appreciate you putting this draft together. Last month, I think when we had a discussion on this, you did talk about some pros and cons of having a consent agenda, and I am on the Community Action Duluth Board, and we use a consent agenda, and I know there's pros and cons. But do you want to just share that again, just because not everyone was here for that piece?
Sure. So obviously the pluses of consent agendas, I did research several districts in Minnesota, and all of them that I looked at, that I Googled, have consent agendas. So this is just the streamlining of the certain items on the agenda that we go through, such as the two main things that from the regular agenda would be the reading and approval of minutes, and then the reading of communications and petitions would just go into the consent, so you don't even have to go through those. They would just be part of the consent. And this was just a structure to show the items. You could actually have a separate document that's your consent agenda. So number 9 could just say approval of the consent agenda, and then you'd have a separate document that would list out all of the items on the consent agenda. They don't have to necessarily make this agenda long. So again, because we have so many monthly repeated standard components, that would make the easy part going through there. Making sure that and sometimes there can be conflicts of interest when you have a lot of things under the consent agenda, so just making sure that if there's anything that needs to get pulled off because a spouse or someone who's active in that doesn't vote for something that they might have to abstain. Sometimes when you have a large consent agenda, things can fall through and you could vote for those things. People feeling free to be able to pull something off the consent agenda. Looking at how some are structured, as a city councilor, we read all of our consent agenda items because we're also on TV, so that people don't have the agenda when they're watching on TV. Others that I've watched just have the approval of the consent agenda and don't even say what's on it. So if you watch certain, so you'd have to go out and find the document that says what the items are on the consent agenda. So certainly I think it's a very common supportive, helpful thing for boards to utilize, but there's certainly, as you're transitioning, you want to put the things on there that make sense. We also have the special resolutions item on the agenda, so anything that needs to get moved out of here could be moved to the consent, or out of consent and into the resolutions.
Thank you for that. And I think I fully support us moving to a consent agenda. I think it makes sense and would give us more time. I have a couple of concerns. One is one that you brought up around hiring and firing. If we do use committee structures the way that they're intended to be used, we might not necessarily be aware if, for example, Member Lofald's, if your son or if your husband is hired for something, and so would there be a way, not that you don't know, but like in a for instance where you might, or if there's a contract, because that's one of the pieces I get concerned about is if we're looking to hire an agency that maybe somebody works for and people don't know. So how are we going to flag, or how can we flag those so people aren't voting?
I think that's a great question. I would hope that the leadership and those involved in those processes would be aware of the potential conflicts of interest. Everyone will get the detail behind the consent agenda, so you're not just going to get the items, you'll still get your packet of information, you'll see all that in there, so hopefully when you're reviewing the consent agenda before the meeting, if you run through it and go, oh wait, I shouldn't vote on that because I know this person, or I'm related to this person, or whatever that is, that you'd be able to trigger that, because you won't just get this without the documentation behind it, so you'll see those as well.
Okay.
So I think that would be able to do it, but then I would think if there was other areas that we were going through in terms of consent, that we'd be aware, or someone in administration would be aware that there could be a potential conflict.
Okay, thank you. Chair Leffler-Kemp and then Member Lofald.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My question is just, will what's put on the consent agenda ever change from month to month? Like, will there at times, and then who makes those decisions about what exactly gets on that consent? I just want to know if it changes or if the same things stay on, I would imagine. Yeah.
I think that for the most part, the structure would stay relatively the same, but certainly any items that are coming out of any of the committees that just are non-controversial or regular can be moved onto the consent agenda. So if there's a month where there's no grants coming through the education committee, I just have here as a staple, here's the approving the following grants. If there were no grants, we'd pull off grants that month, and that wouldn't need to be a consent agenda item because there wasn't anything under that. So what's coming out of the committees, all those actions, or what comes out of our regular, those would drive what goes in there. So you wouldn't be able to set your consent agenda until after you had your committee meetings. But then again, if you change the committee structure, this may change how you populate the consent agenda. Does that help?
It just raises another question. Like, again, if in the business committee, if we have a presentation from our audit, or that becomes a part of our consent agenda, it's on the board book for anybody to look at if they want to. But that just the approval of that process is just on the consent agenda.
Absolutely. It's basically almost identical. It's basically a consent through the committee, except you don't have to take individual motions. You're just doing them all in one motion.
Okay. I think it's helpful what you what the policy said, and then also providing this as an example. I think that was helpful, so thank you. And just as a reminder, that's a first reading, so we'll talk about this again. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, just so it's clear to the public too, that using a consent agenda and changing the way we're voting on things doesn't change all the background information that we still will get as board members and the public will still have access to on any item. So that doesn't change the information that's available. And sometimes I know people have that misconception of consent agendas. So.
There will still be 152 pages of this packet. It will just be in a different order.
And again, this is a late month, so. Yeah. Contracts, change orders. Sorry, my board book. It's like, you've timed out. Any questions there? I had a question about the consultant agreement for the Costin Group. I'd like to see some performance metrics before I would feel comfortable voting on this. And, full disclosure, I didn't support us hiring them last year. And I know that they've done a lot of work, and I know we've covered some of those discussions today. But is there some sort of barometer that we would look for in, and it's a little bit tricky because we're on the cusp of moving into session, but that we would look for them to hit certain metrics before we would renew a contract with them?
I think what I hope for in a lobbyist, and I've worked with 3 different lobbyists in my experience here in Duluth, is their communication with me or with Kathy, with district admin, live time, saying, you need to be here, and what time can you get here, or get in your car, and I'll tell you about why you're coming on the way. Their ability to get us in front of the right people at the right time. And the last session, we met with 45 different legislators and testified maybe 10 times in front of committees. All of those were due to their ability to connect with us. And the past 2 lobbyists that I've had experience with, I've met with our local delegation or very like-minded folks. And this past year, we met with all the committee members from Education Finance and from Education Policy. We met with all of them. And that is really, I believe, because of their connection and their ability to navigate that. We had meetings with the governor, the lieutenant governor, with the staff of the House, the staff of the Senate, who helped us, and the members of the Costin Group, Jeff and Gary, were sitting right there with us, and it was their relationship that got us in those doors that we needed to get into. They also helped us a lot with strategy, and they made sure that we were talking to the right people at the right time. So in my experience, those are the things that I would want to use as a metric is, am I talking to the right people at the right time? Do I know enough about what's going on process-wise to make sure that I'm bringing up the right points that fit in? So I don't know how to put that into measurable terms as far as how many people am I meeting with, or am I meeting with the right people at the right time? We could, but I'm not sure what it looks like.
That's, I think just what you explained is really helpful. Because that's obviously a really critical this is a really critical contract, and our conversation earlier about special education funding is a perfect indicator of why it's really important that we're under contract with the right person, the right people. So even just, and you do this in your superintendent reports, but having it kind of succinctly said like you just did was really helpful. So I appreciate that insight. Member, did you want to add to that?
When I first got here and we talked about the legislative session and we talked about special education, we had actually talked about, we could maybe do this. And we'd put things together. And I can honestly say the amount of times we got called because they sat in every education committee meeting every day there was one to let us know if we were going to be relatable, if it was something on the agenda, the connections that they made. I want to say there was at least 2 times, maybe 3, where we got called the morning of and said, can you get down here this afternoon? And we dropped what we needed to do to get down because there was an opportunity to testify where we never would have known the connections. And so even though there was a little part of me that thought, we can pull this off, there was no way we could have had the level and the connections that we had without Gary and Jeff really being there and being our voice. The other thing they did was they embraced our story. They told it so well, and we knew we did a good job because they didn't know anything about it and could explain it really well. And so they helped us frame what it is that we wanted to say in a way that a legislator who maybe wasn't on an education committee but needed to know about it got that message. And as I shared in other meetings, when you go around and you're not in a legislative environment but you see legislators and they go, there's that girl from Duluth. We did a good job, and they did a good job on our behalf because they're remembering us, they're remembering our story, they're remembering about special education. So while I was kind of thinking we could do it, I highly recommend moving forward because this is our opportunity. This is our year. I think from a policy standpoint, if we can get that information in the right hands and continue those relationships, I think that would be wonderful.
That was really helpful. I appreciate that. Member Lofald, and then Lafferkamp, and then Kirby. Bing, bang, boom. Oh.
So I too really echo what you've shared, and that's great. I had a privilege of being there twice, and I know both times Jeff Anderson didn't necessarily know that I was coming. I think he had gotten a text, and I know that he went out of his way to meet with me and to show me and to bring me places, and I just thought that was really helpful, and I really thought he really knew where I needed to be and gave me great information, and that was really nice because it was kind of intimidating. But the last thing is, and I don't even know how this came up, but it was with Representative Liz Olson, who really gave a high compliment to these two, and she didn't have to do that. It was kind of unsolicited, and I was like, you know who our lobbyists are? Well, of course we do. And I went, oh, okay. If you think they're some of the best in the state, then I think we chose well.
Great.
Yeah, I want to echo too, and we had them here. Was it in May or it was after the session? Yeah, they gave an update either in June or July, a very lengthy update and detailed kind of the number of meetings and stuff that they did. And so it would be good to go back to that if you want. I just wanted to also say, though, that I was down there for a couple different Lobby Day events with the school district, but I was there with other organizations as well. And I heard from a lot of different legislators about the presence that Duluth Public Schools had this year that we hadn't had before. And I would be meeting with legislators with a different hat on, but I would hear that. So I really kind of echo what's been said about, I think they did a great job with us and working with us in so many different ways, and I would wholly support this contract again.
Member Kirby.
Member Lofald said what I was going to say. But in addition to Liz Olson, the other legislators, our local legislators, also told me at that time and since when I was down there how important they were. So I support this.
Thank you. Superintendent?
I just had one more thing to add, that it's not just the legislative session that they help us with, but throughout the year, anytime there's been events where we're in the same room, they're saying, oh, this is so-and-so, and you should go and tell them this, so that we get set up and set up meetings with the commissioner over the summer, with the lieutenant governor, and so they continue to work throughout the year.
If I get one more thing.
I hope they're recording this, because they can put it on their response to proposals moving forward. Yeah, go ahead.
Duluth Public Schools is represented on the state finance work group of 25 people, and I fully believe that our lobbyists lobbied on our behalf. That was a very elite group of people. We met with the commissioner in the summer. Both of our lobbyists were there, and I think they helped get me on that committee so that we could voice our message to a pretty elite group of people. So I do think that they were instrumental in making sure that our voices continued to be heard on all levels, including at the Department of Education.
It's also because you're fabulous. Yeah. And then I think I just want to clarify one other piece under the contracts before we move on. I know we're going to talk about superintendent searches on Thursday, but the Essentia contract, the sponsorship is for them providing PTOT services. Right? It's them providing sports medicine services, not the piece around like naming a field. Right.
Yep.
I knew that. I'm just clarifying it for people who might see this on the agenda and wonder what that's.
Thank you for asking. This has been a very interesting journey. It started out as one contract that included both the sponsorship and the sports medicine services. They broke those two pieces out, but if you read the contracts, they're intrinsically tied to each other. Mm-hmm. So that's the process that they're working through. If you've looked through, we did do a couple edited changes. I think Dr. Kirby at the last meeting had talked about the requirement. We are not required to provide this, so we put desires to provide these services for our students. So that piece of language in the very beginning did change. So if one or the other components changes, either contract could end. So we just wanted to make that clear that the sports medicine is for those services. They're providing those at no charge, so they're not charging us anything to provide those services. And then they are becoming a premier sponsor with the sponsorship agreement for athletics. So another area of concern for folks was, does that mean we can't work with another healthcare organization, say with mental health? We absolutely can, because that's not athletics. So this is specifically defined. If you look at the sponsorship agreement, it defines what athletics is. So they are sponsoring our athletics, and in exchange for that, and in exchange for the dollar amounts to improve our athletic facilities, then we have those same limitations which were in the original sports medicine contract. They moved into the sponsorship that says they can advertise, they have signs up. We're not going to name any part of our district entities a direct competitor to them during the time of this lease. So that's the clarification. So, and then again, just for history, we have been working with Essentia for 16 years. So this is the process has been different, and the amounts the district used to actually pay some dollar amounts to the district or to Essentia for these services. Now we're not paying for anything, and then they're actually contributing money to improve our health and wellness in the district. So that is the process. And then again, for clarification, we did go through a presentation process where we had two entities provide, so there was not just looking at one, we looked at two presentations, we went through multiple questions and answers, we met back with them multiple times, and then moved forward with Essentia. Open for any other questions.
Member Kirby?
Yeah, I have some questions, maybe some concerns, and I've heard from people in the community about this too. Does this restrict acknowledging other contributions? I mean, I have a problem personally with those big signs in the gyms. I don't think those are appropriate. If they want to give us money and give us stuff, that's fine, but we're not selling the public schools to Essentia or anybody else, and that's what it seems like in a way to a lot of people.
Thank you for that question. We did actually change the language in the contract to any signage must be approved by our facilities director. I don't know if you noticed that, facilities director Spooner. That actually took a little while. They put under the guidance of, and I wrote back and I said, nope, it has to be approval of our facilities director, because we do have, just for safety reasons and visual reasons, things need to be put in certain places. Certainly, they are providing us, and this was the original language in the other sports medicine contract, is by them providing us the services, we're acknowledging them. So we want to do that in an appropriate and tasteful way, and the language does say that signage is appropriate. So, but where it is and how it is, that would be run through now our facilities department. So if you have any questions or concerns about that, you may certainly reach out to our facilities director so that we can put those in appropriate places.
What about the other one would be St. Luke's. I mean, they're the two big ones here.
Yep.
But it could be some other health-related stuff. I mean, it's not those two. Wanting to do something similar, who decides whether it's similar and they have exclusive rights to do this?
So we did talk a lot about that with them. So in direct competition of the services that they provide, we would not choose to work with any other vendor besides Essentia during the term of the contract. As far as acknowledgement of participation or donation, as long as it's not under the athletic umbrella, we can certainly acknowledge them just as they would be providing a mental health service or some other wellness component in one of our schools or elementary buildings. We could do it that way. We would engage with Essentia for the sports medicine pieces and those supplemental things, and we would not be accepting any services in direct competition to what they're doing. Did that help?
Well, athletic is a big umbrella.
Yep.
What if someone wanted to give something to, I don't know, tennis?
So if they're going to provide a donation, we can acknowledge the donation. We would not be putting up a sign like they would. It specifically says in the contract that we would not have a sign underneath an Essentia sign that says, thank you, direct competitor, for that donation. They can be acknowledged, but they wouldn't be under the same signage rules as what we have in the contract. But we could certainly acknowledge them as a thank you or in documentation.
That's different than a sign in the gym.
Yep.
It's a lot different. And I think that in the community that has some concern. Essentia being the big person on the block.
And this would be the same language that we've had in place for 16 years.
Well, yeah.
Yep.
I wasn't aware of the sign till I saw somebody sent us a picture of a jingle dance at Penfield, and I saw the sign.
I did too.
And I'd never seen, well, I don't go in the gyms that often, but it seemed more than just a little sign.
Yep.
So I have concerns about that. Okay.
So even, there are some concerns with, I would imagine, acknowledgement signs. It's a 5-year lease, so if we learn something in our 5-year journey that we want to adjust or change, that will be for a future board, and that's great. I just think that the benefits outweigh our reservations. That we need. It's a partnership. It's just St. Luke's is up in Proctor, and they're gaining their services by the ice rink and the athletic facilities and the trainers. And the idea that we have a strength and conditioning trainer being provided by Essentia for our athletes is a safety concern and a growth in our safety. And so I appreciate your reservations, Member Kirby, I do. And, but, and the same thing, isn't Essentia now a big sign next to Heritage Center? Because, they're there. Now, that's not a district building. That's a private building. But, again, we've had a relationship. Essentia has had a nice little plaque on our trainer's door at Denfeld. It's where the kids go in to get taped up and iced up and seen by our trainers. And there's a nice little training room is on there. And then below it, it says Essentia. Nothing too egregious. Again, I think that was genius to put your information under the facility manager's approval. But I'm supportive. Essentia is a big part of our community. They're health related. And it's 5 years, and if something's just not right, I don't think we're hurting kids. We're not hurting. I would not vote for this if I thought that this change was going to hurt kids. It's not. It's going to help our students, and it just is. It's time. And if they're giving, we cannot update our weight rooms with the kind of equipment that Essentia is providing us. It's the time. It is the. I mean, there is not a community in our state that hasn't partnered with somebody, and most of it is medical, and they benefit from their providing services. They benefit from the machines that are safe and new, and I just think it's a win-win for our student athletes.
I don't think any of us would be sitting around the table if we voted for things that hurt kids. So I struggle a little bit with the exclusivity as well. I very much appreciate that this is a tricky position for the district to be in, that there are benefits that come with it. Healthcare is a very dynamic industry, and a lot of things could very well change. I mean, Mayo runs the ambulances up here now, and so who's to say Mayo is not going to be here in 2 years, and they're going to want to give us $425,000, and so we can't bet on that. We can't bet on that happening. I think, 5 years. I don't know. I struggle with this a little bit too. But did you have something else to add, Member Kirby, or?
Well, one thing would be, I'm still left it on decreasing the time, but Essentia has to gain something from this. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. I mean, they're a not-for-profit, for-profit organization. And what they're getting is telling all of these athletes, why don't you go to Essentia? Which I don't think is what should be doing. I mean, there has to be more of an ability to say, we have lots of healthcare people in the community. Here they are. But maybe they say they don't, but it would be surprising if they didn't say, well, I can get you an appointment with so-and-so right away, or the parents. And maybe most of them have Essentia insurance. I don't know. But that bothers me a little bit. So the length of the contract, too, is another concern. But it's, this restricting acknowledgement in the same way from other organizations or people. And we do this for other things, not athletics. I don't know. So.
Member Lefferkamp,
Actually,
and then
I think
sorry.
Ms. Erickson wanted to respond.
They did request 10 years. So we did get them down to 5. The contribution is new. So we had a 3-year contract with no payment but no contribution. So the extra 2 years for the $325,000 contribution I think was a reasonable compromise with the expectation that they'd be putting an investment into the buildings for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I was just going to add the weight room equipment, just to make sure people know this. It was a fun fact I just learned about that. It actually is used for class 2, so it's not just if you're an athletic associated with a team. There's classes in, I don't know what it's called, weightlifting or whatever, and so we benefit with great equipment for our kids taking those classes at both our high schools.
Well, they extend the contract to cover school board members.
I will say that the contract does not have an auto renewal, and they requested that, so it does end in 5 years. There's many contracts that you see now that have the auto renewal clauses in there. They were sensitive to that and understood that we would need to go through this process. Both entities were very respectful and helpful for us that went through this process, that listened to their presentations, listened to our activities directors and their needs. We're getting more out of this contract than our last contract. They're providing 2 strength and conditioning people for both sites, where in the past we had one person shared between both sites. So we're actually getting more services. We're getting supplies covered, which the district used to cover before. I do think it was a very thorough process that the district did to go through this. And, I think they saw the needs in the district, the weight room equipment and facilities that we could see some improvements in. We could certainly use more. We have great need in the district, but I think this was a great stepping off point, and they saw that in their willingness to participate in supporting that. And with that, they did ask for, recognition consideration, and that's what the contract does.
Thank you. Member Eder, did you have something you wanted to add, or were you just letting us know you're heading out? Okay. All right. Moving on to change orders, the PSS track. Did you want to speak to that? Thank you for the information that you have been providing us about that.
This is a no-cost change, and I'm extending the substantial completion date until mid-next summer. And the reason for that is to allow the track's surface, or the synthetic surface manufacturer, an opportunity to come back and make an attempt at repairing, or it's called mud jacking, where they inject an epoxy below the bituminous to try and prevent any ponding in lane 1. I think if it were 70 degrees in June, we could take a field trip and go out there and walk around the track, and everybody would be in awe. They'd think it was this awesome track. But if I had specialized measuring equipment, I could show that in lane 1 there is kind of some ponding areas, and ponding can be normal in tracks of this nature, but I think we're beyond what's considered normal, and we've told the manufacturer that. And right now, spring sports will start up. The kids will love it. It'll work fine, but I want to see what happens with the manufacturer's indication that they can make it better, and see what happens. So that's the reason for the extension of the contract date.
I appreciate your diligence with that. I know it's been a long process, so great. Let's see. Moving on to resolutions. We have acceptance of donations, bank signatures, and amended combined polling places. Is there anything that you want to speak to about the amendment to that?
This is just a movement of a place that I believe there's some work being done to one of the community centers, and so they had to move it from one place to another. So we're following suit, not changing anything but the location of a single place.
Great. I don't think that Duluth Heights Community Club has been renovated since I was hanging out there in grade school or middle school, so that's good they're doing that. Anything that you want to cover on the informational items? Oh, member Eder's missing your report, Mr. Spooner.
Could I go back to contracts
yes,
for just
go
one
ahead.
second?
Please.
Placeholder 5 for the superintendent search firm. Just wanted to provide clarity that we have that there as a placeholder should we move forward with a recommendation, that it could run through this committee rather than a special resolution. But we won't have that information until after you have that meeting, and it wouldn't have been here tonight. So if this is the route you want to go, we have it as a placeholder. If you'd like to have it as a special resolution as a part of the regular board agenda, that's your second option. So we have it here as a placeholder as per our discussion, but weren't sure where it would land. So it wouldn't necessarily be coming out as a recommendation from this committee, but it could run through your committee should that be where it wants to go. And I'll defer to the superintendent if he wants to clarify.
That's helpful because I was, yeah, that's helpful to know. And we have that meeting on Thursday. Okay. I just, again, want to extend thanks to the facilities and maintenance team. You guys have gotten through a lot of orders this last month. That's pretty amazing. And aren't you still short-staffed?
It seems we could use more staff. Between vacation, illness, and absences, we do work short a lot. People have to take on other duties and sometimes do overtime. But everybody's done a great job, and we're ready for snow, which is coming early this year.
Mr. Horton is feeding us.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. You're ready for snow? You might be the only one. Is there anything else on the facility? Do you want to give?
I can give a quick
That'd
update.
Be great.
The Stowe Nature Playscape is, when I wrote this, it was warm out, and now it's not. And the volunteers were going to start installing some of the playscape at Stowe in the pre-K playground. I don't think it happened. This is a donation that Stowe had from one of the Rotary groups in town. I think the board accepted it in April. And work was going to start, and I can't confirm if it did or didn't. But that'll be nice once they get going on that. We're working with the city of Duluth to update our joint power use and lease agreements. We have many agreements for use, for instance, at Wade or different fields that we own and the city wants to use, or the city owns and we use, and we have so many of them right now, and we're going to go through all of them and consolidate and try and make it an accurate document and ensure it's up to date. I talked about the 10-year plan track replacement project, the federal COPS grant for 12 sites. That's proceeding well. I anticipate the work to be completed by early in the new year. It won't be turned on until discussions are conducted and information and training has been put out to everybody, but that's going to be occurring here in the near future. As far as the MDE grants, that was Denfeld and Rockridge, those are complete, so we just have to do some programming at Denfeld, and then we'll be able to turn those on when we turn the other 12 buildings on, when we're ready to add our added safety features. Other than that, Lakewood, we tested for lead and copper, which is a 3-year requirement. Lakewood is the only school that we have that has a well and a septic. We tested satisfactory or below the action level, and results are posted as required. We had a fire inspection at Congdon. Just minor discrepancies were found and corrected. As far as work comp, the data shows we had 8 OSHA recordable incidents this past month, which is unusual. And I talked to Jason Varsness, and there's no direct correlation to why. It was just a random bad month, I guess. Moving on, there's some information on emergency response, and I think you, Member Trinka, had asked about that. And the first item is the radio signal improvement projects. Denfeld, East, Ordine is completed, and Lincoln is in progress right now. And what that does is that allows the emergency responders' radios to communicate better throughout the buildings that are bigger buildings that have a lot of concrete, that have a lot of walls. That was negatively impacting the radio frequencies of the emergency responders. So we've taken actions to resolve that, and we will be done shortly. We had a power outage, and I'm not sure if the board knows what actually occurs during a power outage, so I put that information in this document, and we do have a power outage plan. We have generators at each site so we can keep students. They supply power to emergency lighting, main bathroom fixtures, front office outlets, smoke dampers, fire alarms, elevator lights, IT rooms, and generator louvers, which are required for the generators to run. And then I talked about our emergency response crisis management. That's headed up by Assistant Superintendent Horton and Jason Barsness and our safety committee. They developed the ERCM manual, and that's building leaders, building managers. They have access to the manual, which is in their buildings. It's in this building. It's in every building. We have a site plan, which is site-specific, that each principal follows. And we have classroom guides, which help the teachers know specifically, as related to their classroom, what emergency response actions they are responsible for. But that about covers the report for this month, and I can take any questions that anybody might have.
I appreciate you sharing the emergency response plans with us. Our son's at Myers-Wilkins, and they have like a down power line out in front of the house, and so out in front of the school, and I thought, I wonder what our emergency response plan is. So I appreciate both you and Assistant Superintendent Horton providing us with this feedback and with everyone's response to the city losing power. It was like one school after another after another. It was like everyone's cell phones dinged every 10 minutes.
Rolling brownout.
Yes, right. So, but thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for us to know, and it's not something we would probably ask about unless
Thank you.
unless the power kept going out. All right. I think, and then for future items, we'll approve the levy in December. Oh, there was no document, so. Did you want to? Oh, go ahead.
So, just as informational for the board, we have put together a small group to start studying the fiscal ramifications and strategic ramifications of either staying in this building, or should the district decide if there's interest from a developer or a third party, what that would mean to the district and what plans we'd have to put in place to not be in this building should we decide to move forward. And so we've started some preliminary work, pulling some information together. We'd like to have a committee of the whole meeting, most likely in December, to bring forward just some general information to the board and just to give you a better sense of what the board needs to be thinking about in terms of this building and what needs we would have and what requirements we would have. Should we stay or should we be looking at another location? I think there was an article in the Duluth News Tribune. We all know that through our land acquisition and other considerations through potential sales, there's interest in this building. So I think the sooner we can pull some information together for you, the more educated you can be to be thoughtful about how we want to move forward. So we hope to be visiting back with you within the next month with some more information. So it'd be the facilities director, Dave Spooner, the superintendent, myself, and then we're bringing in some consultants to help us pull together some financial and strategic information.
Thank you. Member Lofeld?
Thanks for going back to G, because it kind of is glossing over at 8, and I don't mean to prolong this, and I want to continue the conversation on our agenda setting processes and what we want to see. But this is really a good example of what our staff and our leadership know that we don't always know. We could, even for me, I suggested we have a visioning thing and we put our little things up there. But these are the guys that know what needs to be on our agenda sometimes. And I do feel like, I want to continue having good, robust, your word, conversation, because this topic is important to all of us. But I do know that the 3 times that I went to the board agenda setting, this was a really thoughtful process that our leadership went to see what it is on the board. That would not have come up. The sale of Hoax, I would not have sent that as a possible agenda because I'm not leading the district. So I just think that, I do want to continue what an agenda looks like, but I also know that. And then we might add things and it will get even longer than this meeting. I just want to think about that. It was a good meeting tonight. I knew it was going to be long. Thanks for the apple. I have some Twix bars if anybody wants chocolate, but thank you.
The teacher has the apple. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So I was just going to mention too, that knowing things like the sale of Hawks is going to be a meaty discussion next month. And as we set the agenda, we try to estimate how much time each item is going to be. There were a few items added tonight that there was some discussion about over the past week, but we've been in committee for about 4 hours, and now we're headed into a special board meeting, and we've had hourly staff on the clock for the last 4 hours waiting for a special meeting. So I know that when we have people presenting, it's easier to have a special board meeting afterwards because we want to make room for that. But tonight we have people in their offices waiting, like Melinda for one, your secretary has to be here for a special board meeting. So she's been on the clock, if you will, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, she's working in there. But, and Tim as well, a few others are around because they're waiting for the special board meeting, which is, could have taken place 4 hours ago. But just a point of reference.
Thank you for that.
I'll try to keep
I could, right. Okay. All right, so with that, we will wrap up the business committee meeting and move into the special school board meeting.
Do we have to adjourn?
No, we actually do not need to adjourn. I was wrong on that. I was just trying to follow all those processes. But we do have to re-adjourn and do a roll call. And because it's a special meeting, we have to go up here too.
I'm sure Melinda's watching.
Okay. So, but everybody, let's take a few minutes here, and then we need to do roll call and do the resolution on why we're going into special meetings. So, okay. Thank you for chairing that, Sally Trinka. Yeah. Okay. It is 8:08, and we are starting our special school board meeting. And so, in absence of Clerk Oswald, if Member Kirby can do the roll call.
I can. Member Eder is absent. I am here. Member Leffler-Kemp?
Yes. Yes, I am here.
Member Lowfald?
Yep, I'm here.
Member Trinka?
Here.
And Member Oswald and Sandsted are excused, and Secretary Tebow is here.
Here. Still here.
Good. All right. Well, we have a quorum.
Thank you for folks. We are going into closed session for our superintendent evaluation. Open meeting law, Minnesota statute, section 13D.05, subdivision 3A. A public body may close a meeting to evaluate the performance of an individual who is subject to its authority. The public body shall identify an individual to be evaluated prior to a closed meeting. Again, this is our regular evaluation of Superintendent Grunset. During the meeting, the board will review the superintendent's progress towards his evaluation goals. Accordingly, pursuant to the law I have cited, I will hereby entertain a motion that this meeting be closed for the purpose of reviewing the superintendent's progress towards his evaluation goals.
So moved.
Moved by Member Kirby. Is there seconded by Member Trinka? Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. We will adjourn to closed session. Thank you.
Good night, Melinda.